Welcome to Sleepy Tales, a place where myths and legends are told slowly and softly to help you gently fall asleep. Before we begin, I'd love for you to share where you're from and what time it is where you are. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy relaxing stories, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a night of our peaceful tales. Now, settle in, relax, and drift off to tonight's bedtime story. Tonight, we journey into ancient Greece, a land of gods, heroes, and timeless myths. From Olympus to the sea, every story carries magic and wonder, guiding you into a world where history and legend blur into dream. The Primordial Beginnings, before gods and heroes, before the earth was firm or the heavens were wide, there was only chaos. Chaos was not a god in the form mortals could imagine, nor even a presence that could be worshipped. It was a yawning expanse of formlessness, the unshaped void in which all things had yet to be born. Out of chaos, the first principles of existence stirred, and from this stirring came the beginning of order. From chaos arose Gaia, the earth, vast and eternal. She was the ground upon which all future life would stand, the foundation of mountains, the fertile womb from which creatures would one day spring. Alongside her appeared Nyx, the night, cloaked in darkness deeper than mortal eyes could endure. Erebus, the gloom of shadow and unlit space, followed closely, twinning with night to veil the cosmos. Hemera, day, would emerge in contrast to night, and together they began the rhythm of time. Aether, the shining brightness of the upper air, radiated into the void. These were the first divisions in the fabric of the cosmos. Dark and light, earth and sky, shadow and brightness. Gaia, rich in life-giving power, did not remain alone. From her depths rose Uranus, the sky, stretching endlessly above her, a vault of stars and air. Together, earth and sky formed the first true union of creation. Their bond was one of necessity as much as of harmony. Gaia, solid and enduring, received the seeds of Uranus, while Uranus enclosed her with his expanse, protecting and pressing down upon her. From their joining came the first divine children, the Titans, destined to shape the next great chapter of the cosmos. The Titans were mighty and far-reaching. Oceanus, the encircling river, flowed around the rim of the world. Hyperion shone with the brilliance of heavenly fire, while Theia, his consort, gave forth brightness and vision. Coeus, master of wisdom, and Phoebe, his radiant counterpart, embodied knowledge and prophecy. Crius, less spoken of, lent strength to the order of constellations and directions. Mnemosyne carried the essence of memory, and Themis embodied divine law and order. Rhea, nurturing and powerful, and Theia, radiant and shining, were among the most important of Gaia's children. Cronus, the youngest, was shrewd, ambitious, and destined for greatness. Yet Gaia's offspring were not only the Titans. From her depths also came monstrous and mighty children, beings that frightened even their own father. The Cyclopes were born, one-eyed giants with unmatched skill in forging. They were the future smiths of thunderbolts, but Uranus despised their strength and form. Alongside them came the Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed ones, whose sheer power and vastness threatened the balance of the cosmos. Each had 50 heads and 100 arms, beings of such scale that their presence filled Uranus with dread. Fearing their might, Uranus forced them back into the womb of Gaia, locking them in her depths where they pressed against the earth. Causing her ceaseless pain, Gaia groaned under the weight of her imprisoned children. Her anguish spread throughout her body, for within her lay both beauty and terror, yet she was denied the chance to let them breathe in the open world. She longed for release and retribution, and so she devised a plan to end Uranus's tyranny. From her very substance, she shaped the first great weapon, a sickle of adamant, sharp and unyielding. She offered it to her Titan sons, calling upon them to strike down their father. Yet fear bound most of them to silence, unwilling to oppose Uranus. Only Cronus, the youngest and boldest, accepted his mother's gift. Ambition stirred within him, and he longed for a reign of his own. Before Cronus's act, however, the cosmos itself continued to expand. From night came dreadful offspring: doom, fate, death, and dreams. Thanatos, the gentle release of death, and Morpheus, the shaper of dreams, drifted forth from Nyx's shadow. Nemesis, the spirit of retribution, was born to ensure balance, while discord brought quarrels and strife to unsettle harmony. These forces were not governed by love or wrath of gods, but were the threads of existence itself, woven into the universe. Alongside them, from the union of sea and earth, strange creatures emerged: Phorcys and Ceto, parents of monsters; Nereus, the old man of the sea, wise and gentle; and countless other spirits that populated rivers, mountains, and groves. The world was filling with divine presences, each embodying a force of nature, an aspect of existence, or a power of life and death. Thus, the cosmos unfolded in layers: chaos at the foundation, then earth and sky, then the Titans, and from them the threads of destiny, life, and order. Still, all was not peaceful. Uranus continued to press heavily upon Gaia, binding her children within her depths, and his rule was one of suppression rather than harmony. The strain between earth and sky grew unbearable, and the balance of creation demanded change. Gaia's heart ached with the cries of her imprisoned sons, and her mind burned with plans of rebellion. In this tension lay the seeds of the first great cosmic upheaval. The world had been born from chaos, shaped by primal powers, and filled with beings of immense strength. Yet power without balance could not endure. The time was drawing near when Cronus would raise his sickle, when blood would fall upon the earth and sea, and when from that blood new beings would rise to shape destinies yet to come. The story of the cosmos had only begun, and already it was turning towards struggle, succession, and the eternal cycle of birth, strife, and renewal. The primordial age was thus not a silent emptiness, but a living, shifting stage upon which the first dramas of existence were written. From chaos to Gaia, from Gaia to Uranus, and from Uranus to the Titans, each generation unfolded with greater complexity, preparing the way for the Olympian gods, who would one day command the heavens and earth. But that future lay hidden in the shadows of time, waiting for the first. Gaia and Uranus, the first dynasty. With the cosmos still young, Gaia's burden grew heavy. The Cyclopes and the 100-handed ones pressed against her from within, vast bodies straining against confinement. The pain of their imprisonment shook the earth, and her cries reached her Titan children. Uranus, high above, cared nothing for her suffering. He feared the strength of the monstrous children and sought only to keep them sealed away, hidden from the world. His rule was not gentle guardianship, but domination, an endless pressing of the sky upon the earth. Gaia, vast and enduring, found herself chained to his weight. Her freedom stifled, her womb tormented. She had forged the adamant sickle in silence, sharpening its edge with resolve, and placed it before her children. They hesitated, torn between love for their father and fear of his wrath. The sickle was no ordinary blade. It was the first weapon, crafted not for hunting nor shaping, but for rebellion. Each Titan looked upon it and turned away, unwilling to lift hand against the one who ruled above. Only Cronus stepped forward. He was the youngest, but in his heart burned a restless ambition. He looked upon his father and saw not a figure of protection, but a tyrant whose time was fading. He accepted Gaia's gift, and with it, her will became his own. The moment of reckoning came as Uranus descended once more to lie upon Gaia, pressing her beneath the weight of his vast body. Hidden in the shadows, Cronus waited with the sickle. His hand did not tremble, for the thought of power steadied him. As his father bent low, Cronus struck. The sickle bit through flesh and sky, severing Uranus's generative power. With a cry, Uranus recoiled, blood spilling from his wound. Drops fell upon the earth and sea, and from them sprang new and strange beings. From the foam of the sea, mingled with his essence, Aphrodite would one day rise, radiant with beauty. From the blood that touched the earth, the Erinyes, the Furies, took form, spirits of vengeance who would hound those guilty of blood crimes. Giants too emerged from the crimson rain, fierce and violent, their strength unmatched. Thus, from violence came new life, and from the fall of one ruler, the seeds of further strife were sown. Uranus, weakened and shamed, withdrew into the heavens, no longer descending to dominate Gaia. In his place, Cronus rose. He freed his brothers and sisters, the Titans, and took his seat as their leader. The sickle, still wet with the act of rebellion, became the symbol of his power. Cronus did not free the Cyclopes or the 100-handed ones. Instead, he too feared their might, and left them in the depths of Tartarus, chained in darkness. Though he had acted on Gaia's urging, he did not fulfill her deepest wish of liberation for all her children. His concern was no longer for his mother's torment, but for his own reign. With Uranus overthrown, the Titans held dominion over the cosmos. Cronus, as their leader, claimed Rhea as his consort, uniting with her to form the ruling pair. The reign of the Titans began, and for a time, the world found balance. Oceanus encircled the earth with his flowing stream, nourishing the lands. Hyperion shone with brilliance, bringing light to the world. Mnemosyne carried memory into the fabric of existence, and Themis established laws and order. Yet though the Titans filled the world with presence and structure, the shadow of violence remained, for succession had been won by blood, and blood wouldn't easily be forgotten. The words of Uranus lingered. In the moment of his fall, he had spoken a prophecy, that one day Cronus too would be overthrown by his own son. The cycle of rebellion, once begun, would not end with him. This curse fell upon Cronus like a shadow, and though he had secured the throne, peace did not dwell in his heart. Suspicion grew, and with it, fear. He looked upon his siblings not as allies, but as rivals, and upon his children not as heirs, but as threats. Even as Cronus ruled, Gaia's influence remained, She had brought about the fall of Uranus, and though her pain had lessened, her sorrow had not ended. Her monstrous children were still imprisoned in Tartarus, their cries echoing in the darkness. She pressed Cronos to release them, but he refused. Thus, the wound between mother and son deepened. Gaia had birthed rulers, yet none ruled with justice enough to honour her fully. She endured, watching as the Titans rose, waiting to see whether her prophecy and Uranus's curse would come to pass. The cosmos, once barren, was now rich with powers and beings. Night still spread her cloak, and day still chased her away. Rivers and seas coursed over the land, and mountains pierced the sky. Spirits filled every grove, spring and stream, each carrying a fragment of life. But above all presided Cronus, sickle in hand, crowned by rebellion, haunted by prophecy. His reign was the second dynasty, the Age of the Titans, but it too bore the mark of impermanence. The first dynasty of Uranus had ended not in peace but in blood. The second had begun in ambition, and its foundations were already cracked by fear. The gods who would follow were not yet born, but their coming was foretold in every shadow, in every anxious glance Cronus cast toward his future. The world had moved from void to from order to strife, and from strife to uneasy rule. The story was still unfolding, and the weight of destiny pressed upon all who lived beneath the sky. The Age of the Titans. Cronus held the sickle still, though its edge no longer dripped with his father's blood. He had claimed the throne of the cosmos, and the Titans bowed before him as their leader. His reign marked the second great order of the universe. Where Uranus had oppressed and feared, Cronus ruled with caution, masking his ambition beneath a facade of stability. For a time, the earth flourished under the hands of the Titans. Rivers flowed, crops grew, and the seas encircled the land in ceaseless rhythm. Mortals had not yet been shaped, but the world itself blossomed under Titan dominion. The reign of Cronus would later be remembered by mortals as a golden age, though in truth it was an age of uneasy balance. The Titans filled the world with structure. Oceanus spread his waters around the edges of the earth, fathering countless rivers and streams. Hyperion and Theia gave rise to the sun and moon, whose light and cycles began to measure the passing of time. Coeus and Phoebe guided wisdom and prophecy, their voices echoing in the oracles yet to come. Mnemosyne carried memory into the very air, a power that would one day give rise to song and story. Themis established order among gods and spirits, her laws woven into the nature of existence. Creus and his kin aligned the stars, placing constellations in the heavens to map direction and season. Rhea, sister and consort of Cronus, stood as queen beside him. She was nurturing and steady, her presence softening the harsher weight of his rule. Yet though harmony seemed to spread across the cosmos, a shadow lingered over the throne. The words of Uranus had not been forgotten. Cronus too would fall, struck down by one of his own children. That prophecy became a wound in his heart, one that never healed. He looked upon the future, not with hope, but with dread. When Rhea bore her first child, Cronus's fear grew. He remembered the sickle, the rebellion, the pain of his father's fall. He imagined his own son rising with the same weapon, repeating the cycle that had begun with Uranus. Fear hardened into resolve, and resolve into cruelty. Cronus took the newborn from Rhea's arms and swallowed it whole. The child vanished into his depths, imprisoned in darkness. Rhea cried out, but her pleas did not sway him. He declared it necessary, for prophecy could not be ignored. One by one, her children were taken. Hestia, the firstborn, was consumed. Demeter followed, then Hera. Each child was swallowed as soon as it drew breath. Hades came next, dragged into his father's body, and finally Poseidon. In Cronus' stomach, the children remained alive yet bound, held in living prison. Rhea's grief deepened with every birth. She was mother to gods who would never walk the earth, never breathe free air, never see the light of the sun. The golden age dimmed for her, though mortals and spirits still sang of Titan rule as if it were perfection. Rhea, though gentle, was not powerless. She endured Cronus' cruelty in silence, but her heart was restless with despair and anger. She longed for deliverance, for an end to the devouring of her children. When she became pregnant once more, she resolved to act. Secretly, she turned to Gaia, her mother, who had once plotted the downfall of Uranus. Gaia, ever watchful, still remembered her pain and her unfreed children buried deep within the earth. She listened to Rhea's cries and offered her counsel. Together, they wove a plan to save the unborn child from Cronus' hunger. When Rhea gave birth, she travelled in secret to the island of Crete. There, in a hidden cave, she bore her sixth son. This child was Zeus, destined to fulfill the prophecy that haunted Cronus. She placed him in the care of nymphs and entrusted him to the goat Amalthea, who nursed him with her milk. Bees filled the cave with honey to feed him, and the Curetes, armed warriors, danced and clashed their shields so that Cronus would not hear his cries. Hidden from his father's gaze, Zeus grew in strength and spirit, nurtured by the earth itself, and guarded by secrecy. Rhea returned to Cronus, carrying a stone swaddled in cloth. She presented it as her newborn, and Cronus, blinded by fear and suspicion, swallowed it without question. He believed himself safe, the prophecy thwarted once more. Yet within him now rested not a god, but a lifeless rock, while his true son grew far from his reach. As the years passed, Cronus continued his reign, outwardly unchallenged. The Titans spread across the earth and sky, their offspring filling rivers, mountains, and seas with countless spirits. The world thrived in its fullness, yet Cronus remained uneasy. The prophecy lingered like a shadow, for fate could not be avoided by force or cunning. Even as he devoured his children, he knew the cycle had not ended. What he had done to his father, another would one day do to him. The sickle, once his instrument of power, now haunted him as a symbol of inevitability. Meanwhile, Zeus grew in secret. Fed by divine milk and honey, guarded by nymphs, he gained strength with every year. His spirit was not one of fear, but of boldness, his heart attuned to justice and courage. The earth had raised him, and the hidden cave had shaped him into one destined for greatness. Around him, the gods whispered their hopes, for they knew that within him lay the power to restore balance. The world itself seemed to await his rise, for it too bore the weight of Cronus's fear-driven reign. The age of the Titans stretched on, marked by abundance but tainted by unease. The land bore fruit, the stars guided time, and the seas encircled the earth. Yet beneath this order, the imprisoned gods stirred within Cronus's depths, waiting. Their voices were silent, but their presence remained. And far away, in the shadows of Crete, Zeus prepared for the day when he would return to claim his place. The story of succession had not ended with Uranus and Cronus. It had only begun to turn once more. The rise of the Olympians. Cronus ruled as the unquestioned master of the cosmos, but his reign was plagued by a single gnawing fear. The prophecy that one of his children would overthrow him, just as he had overthrown his own father, Uranus. To forestall this fate, Cronus devoured each child the moment they were born. One by one, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades and Poseidon were swallowed whole, entombed within the vast stomach of their father, denied the light of the world. To the mortals who would later tell this story, such an act was unimaginable cruelty. To the gods, it was the ruthless logic of survival. Rhea, consort of Cronus and mother of these devoured children, bore her grief in silence for a time. She was the titaness of fertility, motherhood, and the wild earth, and her role was to bring forth life, not consign it to the abyss of her husband's hunger. With each birth, her sorrow deepened, and her resolve began to take form. When she carried her sixth child, she determined she could no longer allow the cycle to continue. She sought help from her parents, Gaia and Uranus, who counselled her to hide the infant and deceive Cronus. This child would be the instrument of fate, the spark of rebellion, the seed of a new age. When the child was born, Rhea gave birth in secret upon the island of Crete, a place veiled from the watchful eyes of Cronus. The infant was Zeus, youngest of the siblings, destined to stand against his father. Rhea swaddled a stone in the infant's wrappings and presented it to Cronus as though it were her newborn son. Blinded by arrogance and the dread of prophecy, Cronus accepted the bundle and swallowed it whole, never suspecting the trick. Thus, Zeus was spared. Rhea entrusted the infant Zeus to the care of the nymph Amaltheia, who nourished him with the milk of a divine goat. The Curates, armoured guardians, danced and clashed their spears against shields to drown out the cries of the baby, ensuring Cronus would never hear his son's voice carried on the wind. Zeus grew in secret, nourished by the wild and hidden among the caves of Mount Ida. In that shadowed sanctuary, he was raised with strength and cunning, destined for a future that only the Moirai, the Fates, could foresee. As Zeus matured, he came to know the truth of his birth and the plight of his siblings, who languished within their father's body. The knowledge kindled within him a fierce determination to free them. He was not yet the ruler of Olympus, not yet the wielder of the thunderbolt, but he bore within him a fire that marked him as different from the titans who had come before. Zeus represented a younger, more dynamic force, impatient with the weight of stagnant rule. With guidance from Gaia, Zeus devised a plan to confront Cronus. Disguised and cunning, he approached his father as an attendant and offered him a potion, a mixture brewed from herbs of power that forced Cronus to disgorge what he had consumed. One by one, the swallowed children emerged, fully grown and radiant, as though no time had passed since their imprisonment. First came Hestia, goddess of the hearth, then Demeter, goddess of the harvest, then Hera, goddess of marriage and sovereignty, then Hades, lord of the unseen realm, and finally Poseidon, master of the seas. United at last, they rejoiced in their freedom, but their joy was tempered by the knowledge that their father would not relinquish power willingly. This liberation marked the beginning of the great conflict known as the Titanomachy, a war that would decide the fate of the cosmos. The Olympian siblings, led by Zeus, stood together as a new force of divine order. Cronus, enraged by betrayal, gathered the Titans loyal to him, and the world braced for a clash of ages. The earth itself trembled as the two generations of gods prepared for battle, old and new, Titan and Olympian, tradition and change. The Titanomachy was more than a struggle for dominance. It was the inevitable turning of the cosmic wheel. Uranus had fallen to Cronus, and now Cronus faced his own reckoning. The Olympians were not merely seeking vengeance, they represented a new vision of divine order. Their power was not rooted in the static rule of primal forces, but in a dynamic balance of elements. Sky, sea, underworld, hearth, harvest, and sovereignty united under the leadership of Zeus. The early clashes of the war shook the foundations of the cosmos. Mountains split, rivers boiled, and the very fabric of the heavens quivered with the force of divine combat. The Titans were vast and ancient embodiments of primordial might. The Olympians, though younger, fought with fierce resolve, and a unity their father and his kin often lacked. Yet the battle would not be decided quickly. The war stretched on for years, a cataclysm echoing through myth and memory. It was in this crucible of conflict that Zeus began to emerge as more than the youngest sibling. His courage, his command, and his unyielding determination marked him as the leader of the new order. But victory was far from certain, and the Olympians would need allies beyond their own ranks to withstand the overwhelming power of the Titans. Thus, the stage was set for the next chapter of the cosmic struggle. The children of Cronus had risen, freed from their father's tyranny, but the war for supremacy had only just begun. The world stood on the brink of transformation, its fate suspended between the ancient might of the Titans and the rising promise of the Olympians. The clash would define not only the future of the gods, but the very shape of existence itself. Titanomachy, War of the Gods. The moment Zeus compelled Cronus to release his brothers and sisters, the world trembled with change. For the first time since Uranus's fall, the balance of power shifted in earnest. The children of Cronus, Zeus, Hades, Poseidon, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia, stood united, no longer hidden or swallowed, but alive and determined. Yet the Titans, ancient and vast, still ruled the cosmos, and they would not relinquish their dominion without resistance. Thus began the Titanomachy, the War of the Gods, a conflict that shook heaven, earth, and sea alike. The battlefield was not bound by mortal geography. The war was fought in the very framework of existence, on Mount Othrys, stronghold of the Titans, across the skies that were once Uranus's dominion, through the depths of the earth where Gaia stirred restlessly, watching her children destroy one another. For 10 years the struggle raged, an era of ceaseless battle in which no dawn brought peace and no dusk brought rest. The Titans, led by Cronus, were joined by many of their kin. Atlas, a warrior of indomitable strength, became the general of their forces. Hyperion, god of light, brought with him the brilliance of celestial fire. Iapetus, stern and calculating, lent his sharp mind to the war council. Oceanus, however, remained apart, refusing to fight. A reminder that not all of Cronus' brothers and sisters had the appetite for endless strife. The Olympians, though youthful and untested, were united by their shared fury at Cronus' tyranny. Zeus wielded the thunderbolt, a weapon newly forged by the Cyclopes, its brilliance rivaling the light of the sun. Poseidon bore the trident, a gift that commanded the seas. Hades carried the helm of darkness, which cloaked him in shadow and allowed him to move unseen. Their sisters, though not wielders of war, in the same way gave strength of another kind. Hera with her cunning, Demeter with her ties to the fertile earth, and Hestia with her sacred fire. Together they formed a front that matched the Titans not in age, but in resolve. Among the Titans were Prometheus and Epimetheus, sons of Iapetus. Unlike many of their brethren, they did not rush headlong into battle. Prometheus, whose name meant forethought, weighed the future carefully. He saw in Zeus not only a challenger, but a rising power whose reign might surpass Cronus' cruelty. Epimetheus, by contrast, embodied afterthought. His decisions came slowly, often too late, yet he followed his brother's counsel with loyalty. Prometheus defected quietly to Zeus's cause, offering his wisdom and strategy. It was he who advised Zeus to seek allies beyond the Olympians themselves. "You cannot fight the Titans with youth alone," he counselled. "Their strength was born with the bones of the world. Seek those whom Cronus cast away, for they too have cause for vengeance." In the depths of Tartarus lay beings of unspeakable power, imprisoned since the earliest days of creation. The Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed giants, each with 50 heads, had been chained by Cronus for fear of their might. Alongside them languished the Cyclopes, one-eyed smiths of colossal skill, who had once crafted the weapons of the gods, but were denied the light of the world. Heeding Prometheus' advice, Zeus descended into the abyss and freed them. Grateful for liberation, the Cyclopes forged weapons that would become the symbols of Olympian might. The thunderbolt for Zeus, the trident for Poseidon, the helm of invisibility for Hades. The Hecatoncheires, in turn, pledged their strength, their 100 hands hurling boulders like hailstones upon the battlefield. With these allies, the war turned. The battles of the Titanomachy were not like the wars of mortals. Mountains were torn from the earth and flung across valleys. Rivers boiled and changed course beneath the fury of gods. The sky itself split with thunder and fire, as Zeus hurled bolt after bolt against the towering figures of the Titans. Atlas stood against him, straining with unbreakable endurance, yet even his might faltered under the storm. Poseidon's trident shook the seas, drowning entire regions of the world, while Hades slipped unseen among the enemy ranks, spreading terror with sudden strikes from the shadows. The Hecatoncheires rained stone upon stone until the very ground seemed to crumble beneath the Titans' feet. For 10 long years, neither side prevailed. Each dawn brought fresh assaults. Each dusk ended in stalemate. Gaia groaned beneath the endless weight of her children's strife, but her voice was drowned in the clash of war. At last, it was the alliance of Olympian and outcast that shifted the balance. The Titans had power, but they lacked unity. Cronus ruled with suspicion, fearing betrayal even among his brothers. Zeus, by contrast, bound his siblings and allies with trust and shared purpose. Each weapon of the Olympians was born not only of might, but of cooperation. Cyclopes forging, Hecatoncheires striking, gods wielding. One fateful battle on the plain before Mount Othrys broke the stalemate. Zeus unleashed a storm unlike any before, a deluge of lightning that set the mountains ablaze. Poseidon shattered the ground with his trident, opening chasms that swallowed Titan warriors whole. The Hecatoncheires hurled boulders so vast they buried whole legions at once. The Titans faltered. Even Atlas could not bear the weight of both sky and war. Cronus himself was driven back, his scythe turned aside by the fury of thunder. When at last the Titans were defeated, their cries echoed through the cosmos. Bound in chains unbreakable, they were cast into Tartarus, the very prison they had once used to confine others. There the Hecatoncheires were set as wardens, ensuring no Titan would ever rise again. Atlas alone suffered a punishment apart. As retribution for his defiance, Zeus condemned him to bear the heavens upon his shoulders for all eternity, a burden that would remind gods and mortals alike of their price of rebellion. The war was over, but its scars remained. The world lay shattered, rivers diverted, mountains broken, the air itself heavy with the memory of divine conflict. Yet, in the silence that followed, one truth was clear. The reign of the Titans had ended. The Olympians, young no longer, had claimed their place as rulers of the cosmos. But their victory was not yet complete. For though Cronus and his brethren were imprisoned, the shaping of the new order, the division of the world, the establishment of justice, and the appeasement of the earth that bore their battles, remained before them. And so, though the Titanomachy had ended, the story of the gods was only beginning. The Age of Zeus, the battlefield of Titanomachy, still smouldered when Zeus took his first breath of undisputed sovereignty. The world, which had for so long been wrapped in the iron grip of the Titans, now trembled with a new rhythm, a rhythm dictated by Olympian hands. It was not a gentle passing of an era, but a violent reset, one that left the mountains split, the seas scarred, and the heavens marked by thunderclouds heavy with authority. Cronus and his brothers had been chained in the fathomless depths of Tartarus, their cries echoing faintly through the abyss, guarded by the Hecatoncheires, whose loyalty now belonged to Zeus. The victory was not just a triumph of arms, but a triumph of vision. Zeus had not fought to replace tyranny with tyranny, though some would say that is precisely what happened. He fought to forge a new order, and in that order, the Olympians were destined to reign. The coronation of Zeus was not marked by a mortal ceremony of laurel wreaths and solemn oaths, but by cosmic signs that no being, divine or mortal, could deny. The sky itself cleared after long years of smoke and storm, unveiling constellations in patterns unseen since before Cronus's reign. A great eagle, sacred and wild, soared above Olympus, circling as though acknowledging its new master. Thunder boomed, not as a weapon of war, but as an anthem of kingship. The gods, his siblings, stood around him on the slopes of Mount Olympus, their faces both weary and exalted. Hestia, goddess of the hearth, lit the first sacred flame to mark the dawn of his reign. Hera, regal even then, placed her hand on his arm, as though foreshadowing her future role as a queen of heaven. Poseidon, with his unshakable trident, stood to his right. while Hades, dark-eyed and grave, kept to his left. Demeter lingered slightly apart, her thoughts already drifting toward the fertile earth she would soon govern. The moment was not questioned. None dared. Zeus had proven himself not only the strongest, but also the most cunning, the one with enough daring to challenge Cronus, enough strategy to enlist allies, and enough charisma to bind his siblings to his cause. Power, once seized, demanded acknowledgement, and all acknowledged Zeus as Basileus, the king of gods and men. Yet rulership was not a solitary crown. With power came distribution, and Zeus, keenly aware that envy and rivalry could tear apart what he had just built, sought to divide the cosmos among his brothers. The division was carried out by lot, a gesture both of fairness and divine inevitability. The sky, vast and infinite, fell to Zeus. He claimed the throne of the heavens, seated above the clouds, watching the world with eyes that pierced through storm and sunlight alike. The sea, boundless and unpredictable, went to Poseidon, who accepted his dominion with a fierce pride, knowing his realm surged with both beauty and peril. The underworld, shadowed and solemn, fell to Hades, who neither rejoiced nor mourned, but accepted the charge with grave dignity. The earth itself, solid ground, fertile plains, mountains and valleys, was left as a common domain shared by all gods, yet still bound under Zeus's overarching authority. The balance was delicate but deliberate, and in this division lay the first blueprint of cosmic order. With realms divided, Zeus turned to the establishment of cosmos, the ordered arrangement of gods and men. It was not enough to topple the Titans. One had to define what would rise in their place. Mount Olympus, with its peaks brushing the stars and its valleys veiled in mists, became the new seat of power. From its gleaming halls, the Olympians ruled not as isolated tyrants, but as a council, though always under Zeus's final word. The first laws of divine order were set. Oaths sworn by the river Styx became binding beyond recall, their breach punishable by exile and agony. Hospitality, xenia, between gods and mortals was sanctified, enforced by Zeus himself as protector of guests and strangers. Justice, once a malleable weapon of Cronus, began to harden into principle, though often wielded with divine favoritism. The seasons were established through Demeter's hand, the cycles of life and death acknowledged through Hades' realm, and the mysteries of the sea unfolded under Poseidon's rule. Each Olympian was granted their dominion, but always with Zeus's authority as the unshakable axis. The world, once chaotic and suffocating under Titan rule, began to breathe in rhythm with Olympian governance. It was not long before the Olympians' influence stretched far beyond their immediate realms. Mortals, scattered and fragile, began to look upward in awe and fear, offering sacrifices in exchange for favour. Smoke from altars curled toward the heavens, carrying prayers of harvest, safety, and victory. Zeus, with a keen sense of justice and control, rewarded the faithful and struck down the arrogant with bolts of lightning. His siblings followed suit, weaving themselves into the fabric of mortal life. Hera became the patron of marriage, though her jealousy already simmered beneath her queenly composure. Poseidon shook the earth with his trident, both as a warning and as a reminder of his dominion. Hades ruled in silence, feared but respected, his presence inevitable as death itself. Olympian authority was not merely political, it was cosmic. Their reign reshaped the order of the universe, binding both divine and mortal alike to laws that reached beyond individual power. The balance of fear and reverence became the foundation upon which Zeus's age was built. And yet, beneath the grandeur of this new age, seeds of future strife were already sown. The Titans, though bound in Tartarus, had not been annihilated. Their children and allies still roamed the edges of the world, whispering vengeance. Gaia, mother of all, brooded in silence, her heart heavy with resentment over how her children had been cast into darkness once more. And among the Olympians themselves, ambition and rivalry simmered like embers awaiting kindling. For though Zeus had crowned himself ruler of the cosmos, and though the Olympians now stood exalted, the story of divine reign was far from complete. Power secured was never power guaranteed, and the age of Zeus, though radiant in its dawn, would face storms yet unseen. The Gigantomachy struggle for power. Though the Titans were imprisoned in Tartarus, their defeat did not extinguish the old forces entirely. Gaia, mother of Earth and of both Titans and mortals, seethed at the confinement of her children. She had witnessed the overthrow of Uranus, and then Cronus, the cycle of divine violence repeated, and the imprisonment of beings she had nurtured from the beginning of time. Though the Olympians had claimed dominion over sky, sea, and underworld, Gaia's wrath lingered, quiet but inexorable. From her fury, a new generation was born. The giants, massive and formidable, creatures of immense strength, who bore both the fury of the earth and the bitterness of her vengeance. They were not Titans, but their power rivaled the Olympians. They grew quickly, rising from the soil, mountains, and volcanic plains, their hands capable of uprooting forests and shattering stone. The giants were Gaia's instruments. Her assertion that the old order, though defeated, was not yet silenced. It was inevitable that this new generation would challenge the rule of the Olympians. The giants marched upon the heavens, hurling boulders and wielding clubs that could fell mountains. Their war cry shook the earth, and the skies, once calm under Zeus's command, were rent with storm and fire. The Olympians, though seasoned from the Titanomachy, were forced to confront an enemy that combined brute force with relentless fury. The war, known as the Gigantomachy, unfolded across multiple realms. Olympus itself became a battlefield, with the heavens raked by thunderbolts and torn apart by volcanic upheaval. Poseidon struck with waves and quakes, deflecting the giants from advancing upon the sacred peaks. Hades unleashed shadows from the underworld, ensnaring the unwary and sending them to the depths. The sisters, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia, lent their influence subtly but decisively. Hera with strategic cunning, Demeter through manipulation of the earth's forces, and Hestia maintaining the sacred hearths that anchored divine resolve. Yet the giants were relentless. Their sheer numbers and strength threatened to overwhelm the Olympians, even with their thunderbolt and trident and helm of darkness. The battlefield stretched from the heavens to the mortal planes, and every god was tested in endurance, creativity, and strategy. For the first time, it became clear that victory might require mortal involvement, an extraordinary concession in a war among immortals. It was then that Prometheus, ever the strategist, reminded Zeus that mortals could serve as instruments in divine affairs. Heracles, grandson of Zeus through Alcmene, was chosen as the mortal champion to aid the gods. Though not yet immortal, his strength, courage, and resilience were exceptional, and his presence on the battlefield turned the tide. The Olympians wielded him as an extension of their own might, his actions decisive in the confrontation with several of the largest and most destructive giants. Heracles fought not out of desire for glory alone, but because his lineage bound him to the cosmos. He struck with precision and unyielding force, often complementing the attacks of the gods. Zeus's lightning and Poseidon's trident worked in harmony with Heracles' blows, creating a synergy that the giants could not withstand. One by one, the creatures fell. Mountains shattered beneath their weight, and forests were uprooted in the struggle. But the Olympians, aided by Heracles, held firm. Among the notable giants, Alcyoneus, who could only die outside his native land, was driven from the plains where he had grown strongest, enabling Heracles and the gods to bring him down. Porphyrion, whose size rivaled Olympus itself, was struck by Zeus's thunderbolts and finished by the mortal champion's hand. Each victory reinforced the hierarchy of divine power and demonstrated that mortal aid, when sanctioned by Zeus, could tip the scales against seemingly unstoppable forces. The Gigantomachy was not merely a test of strength, but a reassertion of divine authority. Gaia's challenge, born of the old order, revealed cracks in the Olympians' nascent rule, but the cooperation between gods and chosen mortals displayed the cohesion and adaptability of the new pantheon. By the time the last giant fell, Olympus itself bore the scars of battle, yet the message was clear. The age of Olympian supremacy was not a temporary dominance, but a structural and cosmic fact. In the aftermath, the prisoners of Tartarus, the Titans, were reaffirmed in their chains. Zeus's victory over the giants ensured that none could rise to challenge the Olympians again without extraordinary divine disruption. The earth, still resonating with Gaia's muted anger, remained a reminder that rebellion, while possible, would be contained by the combined force of heaven, sea, underworld, and mortals, chosen to act on behalf of the gods. The Gigantomachy reinforced the new order's principles. Zeus was not merely a king of warlike might. He was a ruler capable of strategic foresight, capable of recognizing the potential of mortal participation, and capable of integrating his siblings' strengths into a unified force. The hierarchy of Olympus was solidified. Zeus as king and arbiter, Poseidon as master of seas and earthquakes, Hades as lord of death and subterranean riches, and the remaining Olympians as essential stewards of their respective realms. Thus concluded the struggle for divine supremacy, though the cosmos, as ever, remained susceptible to unrest. The Olympians now had a mandate and a record of enforcement that none could easily challenge. Mortals would witness the echoes of these battles in storms, earthquakes, and the fury of natural disasters, while the gods themselves established traditions, rituals, and sacred observances to remind all beings, immortal and mortal alike, of their enduring authority. The age of the Olympians was no longer merely the promise of a new era. It was an accomplished reality. Zeus had claimed his throne, the realms had been divided, and the forces of rebellion had been subdued. Yet the memory of the Titans, the anger of Gaia, and the occasional ambition of gods themselves, suggested that vigilance was necessary. Supremacy could be won, but it must be maintained, and so the Olympians, newly victorious, began to rule with a mixture of authority, foresight, and calculated restraint. The Gigantomachy was thus both a climax and a foundation. It marked the final subjugation of forces born from the old order, while simultaneously establishing the structures through which Olympus would govern. From this point onward, the Olympians were not merely victors, they were architects of a cosmos whose balance would endure for ages, tested by mortals, challenged by titans in exile, and occasionally threatened by other forces beyond even their sight. The creation of mortals. With the Olympians firmly established, the cosmos had a new order. Sky, sea, and underworld, ruled by Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades respectively, and the balance of the world maintained through divine oversight. Yet the universe remained incomplete. While the gods presided over immortality and dominion, the earth itself demanded new life, creatures that could inhabit its plains, forests, and riverbanks. Among these creations, none would bear such significance as mortals. Beings who combined fragility with ingenuity, yet were capable of ambition and folly in equal measure. Prometheus, the Titan who had aided Zeus during the Titanomachy and the Gigantomachy, turned his intellect to this task. Forethought and cunning guided him, a gift inherited from his very name. While his siblings remained with the Olympians, he walked upon the earth, observing the barren lands, the rivers flowing in solitude, and the forests untouched by sentient eyes. From the clay of the earth he shaped the first humans, moulding their bodies with care, crafting hands capable of both labour and invention, faces capable of thought and expression, and forms that, though mortal, reflected the spark of divine potential. These early mortals were imperfect but resilient. They wandered the earth, learning to manipulate fire, hunt, and gather, their curiosity driving them toward mastery over their environment. Yet Prometheus, seeing their vulnerability, knew that mere shape and flesh would not suffice. Mortals required tools, knowledge, and most importantly, fire, the emblem of civilization itself. It was said that fire belonged to the gods, a power not granted to mortals. Yet Prometheus, moved by both foresight and compassion, stole flames from Olympus and delivered them to humanity. In secret, he carried the divine fire down to the earth, hiding it in hollow reeds and igniting the first halves. Mortals gathered around the flickering light, learning to cook, to warm themselves against cold nights, and to forge metals. Civilization began with sparks, and those sparks were a gift stolen from the gods. Zeus, despite the victory of Olympus and the careful balance of realms, could not ignore this transgression. Fire, the domain of the heavens, had been taken without permission. Prometheus's act of benevolence, though calculated and foresighted, was a direct affront to Zeus's authority. In his wrath, Zeus sought to punish the Titan, not merely to avenge the theft of fire, but to remind all beings, divine and mortal alike, that defiance would not go unchallenged. Prometheus was bound to a remote cliff, high above mortal eyes, while an eagle, ever vigilant, descended daily to consume his liver. By divine law, his liver regenerated each night, ensuring that his suffering was perpetual, unending, and emblematic of the consequences of defiance. Though Prometheus endured, his foresight and ingenuity remained intact, a quiet testament to the resilience of those who dared to challenge the cosmos while acting for the benefit of mortals. The punishment of Prometheus, however, extended beyond him alone. Zeus, intent on balancing the gift of fire, sought to counteract its benefits with a measure of suffering. From the earth, he fashioned Pandora, the first woman, endowed with beauty, curiosity, and cunning, a reflection of the gods' power to create as well as to ensnare. Each Olympian contributed a trait. Aphrodite granted allure and grace. Hermes gave cunning and subtlety. Athena provided skill and craftsmanship, and Hephaestus sculpted her from clay, bringing the goddess made mortal to life. Pandora was both a gift and a test. She was sent to Epimetheus, brother of Prometheus, who had been warned not to accept gifts from the gods, but whose nature, governed by afterthought rather than foresight, led him to welcome her. With her arrival came the infamous container, a vessel imbued with divine potency, which she was instructed not to open. Yet human curiosity, inheriting the reflection of the divine in Pandora, overcame her caution. The container was unsealed, and from it flowed suffering, disease, toil, pain, and mortality itself. Misfortune spread across the earth, reaching the mortals Prometheus had shaped, transforming their lives from untested existence into lives marked by hardship, labour, and struggle. Even so, all was not lost. Within the container, at its base, remained hope. Though Zeus had introduced suffering to assert his authority, the Olympians didn't entirely extinguish the potential for resilience. Mortals, armed with fire, with ingenuity, and with hope, were now capable of enduring hardships and striving for mastery over their world. The paradox of their creation, the combination of potential, limitation, and suffering, defined human existence. Mortals were neither gods nor animals, but a unique bridge between the divine and the natural order, capable of innovation, folly, and adaptation. Through Prometheus, mortals acquired not just fire, but foresight, the capacity to plan, to create, and to resist immediate danger. Through Pandora, they learned the duality of existence, that curiosity and desire carried risk as well as reward. The Olympians' oversight imposed limits, but those limits were the catalyst for growth, for challenge, and for the eventual elevation of humans through effort and perseverance. Civilization in all its forms, agriculture, metallurgy, language, and ritual, arose from this interplay of divine gift and divine punishment. Thus the Age of Mortals began, set against the backdrop of Olympian rule. While Zeus held dominion over sky, Poseidon ruled the seas, and Hades presided over death, humanity emerged as an entity capable of both reverence and defiance. Mortals learned to honour the gods through sacrifice and ritual, yet also retained the spark of ingenuity that allowed them to question, to plan, and to act independently. Their existence would forever remind the Olympians of the intertwined nature of power and consequence, of foresight and recklessness, and of hope amidst suffering. The creation of mortals, the gift of fire, and the release of hardships through Pandora were thus defining events of the early Olympian age. Through these acts, the gods established not only their authority, but also the parameters of mortal life. The cosmos was no longer a simple hierarchy of power, but a complex network of interdependent forces. Immortal rulers, vengeful or benevolent, and mortals who navigated the challenges imposed upon them. In this world, both divinity and humanity had roles to play, each shaping the other in cycles of cooperation, rebellion, and consequence. And so, even as Zeus's supremacy solidified, the foundations for future struggles were laid, both among the gods themselves and between gods and mortals, forever entwining the fates of Olympus with those of humanity. The Mythic Ages of Man, with mortals now shaped and empowered by Prometheus, yet tempered by the trials brought through Pandora, the world entered a period of dynamic growth and transformation. Humanity, though mortal and imperfect, displayed an early capacity for both ingenuity and folly. The gods observed from Olympus as men and women carved settlements from wilderness, cultivated the earth, and learned to harness the gifts of fire, metals, and language. Yet the passage of time revealed a pattern. The moral and physical state of humanity ebbed and waned, shaped by divine favour and censure, circumstance and choice. Hesiod, one of the earliest chroniclers of human history, articulated this progression as a sequence of ages, each defined by the virtues and vices of humankind, and by the degree to which they were touched or constrained by the gods. These ages, gold, silver, bronze, heroic, and iron, told a story not merely of development, but of decline, a mythic reflection of the challenges that mortals faced under the ever-watchful eyes of Olympus. The first of these epochs, the Golden Age, was a time of harmony and ease. Humans lived without toil, free from pain, disease, or suffering. The earth provided abundance effortlessly, crops flourished without cultivation, and the climate remained temperate and forgiving. Mortals of this age enjoyed direct communion with the divine, unburdened by the harshness of labour or fear of death. In this era, the gods watched with benevolence. There was no need for conflict, no need for law or ritual beyond simple acknowledgement of the natural order. Humanity existed as an extension of the divine will, embodying a nobility and purity that would never be repeated. Yet perfection, as often in myth, was ephemeral. Zeus, whose oversight encompassed justice as well as rule, decreed that such untested ease could not endure, and the Golden Age gave way to the Silver. The Silver Age introduced labour, seasons, and the first hints of human limitation. Mortals became less aligned with the divine, living longer than in the Bronze or Iron Ages, but yet becoming arrogant and careless. They refused the offerings of the gods and disregarded the natural harmony that had sustained their predecessors. Their lifespans, though extended, were marred by strife, and the mortality imposed by Pandora's curse became more tangible. The Silver Age reflected a moral decline, a disruption of the balance between divine grace and human responsibility. Mortals learned the consequences of hubris, both in defiance of the gods and in their treatment of one another. Though the age was neither completely corrupt nor devoid of achievement, it was a necessary stage, shaping human understanding of limitation, law, and respect for divine authority. From the Silver emerged the Bronze Age, a period defined by strength, aggression, and martial prowess. Humans of this time became warriors, shaped from the materials of the earth itself, reflecting the harshness and rigidity of bronze. Tools and weapons, derived from metals nurtured by Prometheus's fire, became instrument of both creation and destruction. Mortals were powerful and ambitious, but increasingly disconnected from the gods, their lives dominated by conflict, and their cities fortified against both divine and mortal threats. The Bronze Age, while marked by skill and might, lacked the moral and spiritual refinement of the Golden Age. Humans were durable and fearsome, yet their world became one of struggle, echoing the divine wars that had preceded their creation. They perished often by violence, either self-inflicted or in combat with neighbours, reflecting the instability of a humanity untethered from divine guidance. The Olympians observed, some with concern, others with detached curiosity, as mortals learned the lessons of mortality and the cost of ambition. An exception within this trajectory of decline was the heroic age. Here, mortals displayed extraordinary qualities: courage, honour, and loyalty. Heroes such as Perseus, Bellerophon, and the warriors of Thebes and Troy exemplified a rare nobility that contrasted with the surrounding ages of decadence. This period suggested that divine favour could inspire humanity to transcend ordinary limitations. The heroic age was closely tied to mythic events, battles of cosmic and mortal significance, and quests that shaped the world. Mortals of this era were intermediaries of divine will. They acted on behalf of the gods or confronted chaos in ways ordinary humans could not. Though mortal, they approached immortality through deeds and reputation. Yet even in this exceptional age, imperfection persisted. Hubris and miscalculation led to tragedy, reinforcing the delicate balance between mortal action and divine oversight. Finally came the Iron Age, the age Hesiod described as ours, the time of toil, suffering, and moral decline. Mortals now laboured endlessly, encountering hardship in agriculture, warfare, and life itself. Social bonds weakened, trust diminished, and greed and deception became pervasive. Mortals could no longer enjoy the simplicity or ease of earlier times. The consequences of Pandora's jar, now fully realised, dominated existence. Yet even in this age, hope remained, carried as a faint ember within human hearts. Mortals retained the spark of intelligence, the ability to craft, to learn, and to endure. They honoured the gods, though often inconsistently, and continued to seek balance between survival and virtue. Life became a struggle under divine will. Mortality ensured suffering. Ambition invited divine censure. Yet the capacity for courage, creativity, and resilience endured. Throughout these ages, humanity's trajectory was guided, monitored, and occasionally corrected by the gods. Mortals were never autonomous in the cosmic sense. Zeus's oversight, Hades' dominion over death, Poseidon's control of the seas, and the influence of all Olympians shaped the possibilities of human life. Even suffering served a function, as both punishment and teacher, embedding lessons of obedience, humility, and endurance into mortal existence. The Ages of Man illustrate the interplay between divine intention and mortal action. Gold may have reflected untested perfection, but without challenge it could not endure. Silver, bronze, and iron reveal the consequences of disconnection from divine favour, while the heroic age demonstrates that exceptional virtue, courage, and alignment with the divine can elevate mortals beyond ordinary decline. Humanity, in essence, becomes a narrative medium through which the gods maintain influence, teaching through example, reward, and punishment alike. Through these epochs, mortals learn to navigate a complex and often contradictory world. Their labour and suffering were balanced by ingenuity and ambition, their mortality tempered by hope and occasional glimpses of nobility. Olympus watched, its gods enforcing order, granting favour, and sometimes exercising wrath, ensuring that the story of humanity remained intertwined with the ongoing narrative of the divine. Thus, the mythic ages of man reflect both decline and potential. Mortals endure in a cosmos structured by Olympian authority, their lives shaped by forces beyond their control, yet influenced by the sparks of foresight, courage, and hope first imparted by Prometheus. In this interplay between human action and divine will, the stage was set for the epic events, heroes and tragedies that would come to define the narrative of mortals under the rule of the Olympians. Divine order and justice. As Olympus solidified its dominion over the cosmos, and mortals progressed through the ages of man, the concept of order became central to both divine and human existence. Beyond victory in war, or the creation of mortals, the Olympians understood that stability required principles, enforcement, and a consistent framework within which gods and men alike could operate. Central to this structure was Zeus, whose authority extended not merely over sky and storm, but over law, oath, and the very threads of fate that governed all existence. Zeus, king of the gods, became the ultimate arbiter of divine and mortal behaviour. His role encompassed not only the dispensation of punishment, but also the preservation of oaths and the maintenance of justice across realms. Mortals, who often strayed between obedience and transgression, were reminded that divine oversight was unyielding. Promises sworn under the gaze of Zeus, particularly upon the sacred river Styx, were absolute, with consequences for breach extending far beyond mortal comprehension. Even the gods themselves recognized the binding nature of the oaths, for the sanctity of promise was foundational to Olympus's authority. Yet Zeus's power, though vast, was not absolute in every respect. Above even him, or perhaps outside his immediate influence, were the Moirai, the Fates, who wove the destinies of gods and men alike. Clotho spun the thread of life, Lachesis measured its length, and Atropos severed it at the appointed time. The Olympians, though powerful, could not fully circumvent these threads. Even Zeus's interventions in mortal affairs had limits. Mortality and misfortune were sometimes inescapable, and the inevitability of death applied universally. The Moirai represented a system of cosmic order that surpassed individual desire or divine will, reminding both gods and men that existence was governed by patterns, consequence, and unalterable design. Justice, however, was not purely an impersonal mechanism. It manifested through deities tasked with enforcing moral and societal balance, ensuring that hubris, greed, or malice did not go unchecked. Nemesis, the goddess of retribution, observed those who overstepped bounds, delivering punishment proportionate to offence. She reminded mortals and gods alike that arrogance and presumption were met with consequences beyond mere mortal retribution. Dike, daughter of Zeus and Themis, embodied justice in human society, overseeing the fairness of conduct and the upholding of moral law. Her influence guided rulers, judges, and citizens, establishing ethical standards in governance and community. Meanwhile, Themis herself, ancient and wise, represented divine law, counsel, and the natural order, ensuring that the decrees of Olympus harmonized with the inherent balance of the world. Through these figures, divine justice was both concrete and philosophical, immediate and enduring. The gods' power was tempered by principles that demanded fairness and respect for cosmic patterns. Mortals were given laws, guided by rituals and customs, and observed by deities whose purpose was to maintain equilibrium. This dual structure, divine enforcement paired with philosophical balance, ensured that Olympus's supremacy was sustainable, not merely through force, but through legitimacy, reverence, and moral structure. The concept of fate and justice extended into the moral framework of human existence. Mortals, subject to the decrees of Zeus and the threads of the Moirai, learned that actions carried consequences. Villages and cities prospered when ethical conduct aligned with divine favour, yet even minor violations of justice could invite disaster. Floods, famine, or misfortune were often interpreted as the reflection of divine displeasure, the outward manifestation of nemesis, or the immutable threads of destiny. The gods' involvement was therefore not arbitrary. It was a consistent reminder that human freedom was constrained by cosmic order, and that virtue and vice carried weight far beyond immediate perception. The balance between divine authority and mortal destiny was delicate and deliberate. Zeus could wield thunderbolt, summon storms, or command obedience, but he also relied upon law, oaths, and the oversight of deities like Dike and Nemesis to regulate conduct. Mortals, meanwhile, navigated their lives with awareness of divine supervision, yet retained the agency to act within certain bounds. Heroic deeds, acts of piety, and the maintenance of social and familial bonds were rewarded, while hubris, impiety, and injustice were punished, sometimes subtly, sometimes with overwhelming force. The interplay between freedom and constraint formed the ethical backbone of the human world, creating a dynamic in which mortals were participants rather than mere subjects of divine will. Justice among the gods themselves mirrored this system. While Olympians held immense power, they were bound by both precedent and principle. Zeus's judgments were tempered by counsel from Themis and the inherent structure of the cosmos. Even divine conflicts between siblings, lovers, or allies were governed by a framework of consequences and moral expectation. Retribution could be personal, as when Hera pursued those who offended her, but the overarching balance was maintained to ensure the stability of Olympus and the wider universe. The gods' struggles and negotiations illustrated that even beings of extraordinary power were subject to rules beyond raw strength, reflecting the primacy of order and fairness as foundational to cosmic stability. Through these mechanisms, the Olympians established an enduring system in which power and responsibility were inseparable. Zeus's authority was not exercised through caprice alone. It was reinforced by law, morality, and the recognition of destiny. Mortals, though vulnerable and ephemeral, became integral to this system, their lives unfolding as a reflection of the complex interplay between divine will, moral choice, and inevitable fate. Civilization itself flourished within this balance, its cities, rituals, and governance shaped by both awe of the divine and adherence to ethical standards. The Age of Olympus, therefore, was not solely defined by conquest or creation, but by the establishment of order and justice as enduring principles. Zeus, through his role as guardian of oaths and overseer of morality, ensured that the Olympian rule was not merely enforced through might, but embedded in the moral and cosmic framework of the world. The Moirae, Nemesis, Dike, and Themis worked in concert with the King of Gods to sustain a universe in which law, fate, and ethical consequence intertwined, shaping both mortal life and divine interaction. Thus, divine order and justice became a cornerstone of existence. Mortals lived within a universe structured by law and consequence, guided by divine oversight, yet endowed with the potential for agency and heroism. The Olympian supremacy, while secure through power, was legitimized through principles of balance, fate, and morality, creating a cosmos in which authority and responsibility, freedom and constraint were inextricably linked. And even as human ambition grew and mortal societies expanded, the presence of Olympus remained constant, a framework of observation, intervention, and ethical oversight. In this system, the triumphs and failures of mortals were not isolated events, but expressions of a larger cosmic narrative, one in which divine justice ensured that the threads of fate, the rule of law, and the enforcement of morality sustained both order and the enduring majesty of the Olympians. The Olympian Pantheon. With the foundations of divine order, justice, and human civilization established, the structure of the Olympian family solidified into a coherent pantheon, each deity embodying specific domains, powers, and responsibilities. The Olympians were not only rulers of realms, sky, sea, and underworld, but also patrons of human virtues, vices, and pursuits. Their influence extended from the vastness of the cosmos to the minutiae of mortal life, shaping culture, morality, and destiny. Understanding the full scope of the pantheon provides insight into the balance, rivalry, and harmony that defined Olympus. At the pinnacle of the pantheon stood Zeus, king of the gods, arbiter of law, overseer of oaths, and wielder of thunderbolt and storm. His authority over the sky and weather reflected his broader role as enforcer of order, justice, and fate. Beside him sat Hera, queen of the gods, guardian of marriage and familial bonds, whose influence ensured stability among mortals and immortals alike. While Zeus maintained authority through power, Hera exercised subtlety, strategy, and oversight, a counterpart whose influence extended through both human and divine affairs. Among the next generation of Olympians, Athena's presence was unique. Born fully grown and armoured from the head of Zeus, she embodied wisdom, strategy, and craft. Athena's birth, extraordinary in its manner, symbolised the union of thought and power. Divine intellect manifested as a force capable of shaping warfare, governance, and culture. As goddess of wisdom and patron of cities, Athena guided both mortals and gods, fostering innovation, law, and civic order. Her role on Olympus was both advisory and catalytic, reflecting the principle that knowledge and prudence were as essential as might in sustaining divine and mortal realms. Apollo and Artemis, twins born of Zeus and Leto, represented complementary forces of balance, light, and precision. Apollo, god of the sun, prophecy, music, and healing, presided over knowledge, artistic achievement, and insight. His presence illuminated truth and morality, reinforcing Zeus's mandate through enlightenment and foresight. Artemis, his sister and twin, governed the moon, the wilderness, and the hunt. Protector of animals and of young women, she embodied independence, vigilance, and the wild aspects of nature. Together, the twins represented the duality of divine influence, Apollo as guiding light and order, Artemis as guardian of natural freedom and the cycles of life. Ares and Hephaestus contrasted one another, embodying distinct facets of human and divine experience. Ares, god of war, embodied aggression, courage and conflict. His energy fueled battles, heroism, and the violent impulses inherent in mortal and divine spheres alike. Though often contentious among the gods due to his bloodthirsty tendencies, his role was essential, demonstrating that conflict and strength were integral to maintaining order and testing virtue. Hephaestus, in contrast, represented craftsmanship, technology, and constructive creation. The god of fire and forge worked tirelessly to craft weapons, armour, and tools, serving both gods and mortals. Hephaestus's creative capacity balanced Ares' destructive force, illustrating the necessity of both construction and conflict in a cosmos defined by dynamic equilibrium. Hermes, messenger of the gods, bridged realms through mobility, cunning, and communication. God of trade, thieves, travellers, and eloquence, Hermes' versatility made him indispensable. He conveyed messages among gods, guided souls to the underworld, and influenced mortal commerce and cunning alike. Hermes' domain underscored the importance of movement, negotiation, and cleverness, demonstrating that divine authority could be mediated through persuasion and agility as well as force. Aphrodite, born from sea foam and possibly from the severed genitals of Uranus, embodied beauty, desire, and attraction. She governed love, both mortal and divine, and her influence extended into politics, alliances, and conflict, as passion often motivated both gods and humans. Aphrodite's power was subtle yet pervasive, shaping relationships, loyalty, and ambition through allure and affection, and demonstrating that control over emotion could rival even physical force in its effects on mortal and divine destinies. Completing the core pantheon were Hestia, goddess of the hearth, and Dionysus, god of wine, ecstasy, and ritual. Hestia maintained domestic and sacred stability, ensuring continuity in both mortal households and divine observances. Her influence was quiet yet foundational, emphasizing the centrality of home, ritual, and harmony in sustaining life and society. Dionysus, in contrast, represented chaos, transformation, and liberation. God of festivity, ritual, and the ecstatic experience, he balanced the stability imposed by Hestia and the other Olympians. Through Dionysus, mortals and gods alike confronted the unpredictability of existence, the necessity of release, and the cathartic potential of celebration. Each Olympian, while distinct in domain and temperament, functioned as part of a coherent system in which their powers, responsibilities, and interactions reinforced divine order. Conflicts arose naturally. Ares' aggression, Hera's jealousy, or Aphrodite's manipulations. But even these tensions contributed to a dynamic equilibrium. The pantheon's structure mirrored the cosmos itself. Diverse forces interdependent, each contributing to the balance between order, justice, creativity, and transformation. The 12 Olympians, often defined as Zeus, Hera, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Hephaestus, Hermes, Aphrodite, Hestia, Demeter, and Dionysus, reflected a combination of essential domains: authority, strategy, creativity, communication, passion, stability, and transformation. Their interplay ensured that both divine and mortal worlds were guided, tested, and shaped. Mortals could appeal to their respective domains for assistance, yet the gods' favour was conditional upon obedience, ritual, and moral alignment. In this way, Olympus maintained both influence and legitimacy, integrating power with principle. Beyond individual attributes, the Olympians' interactions with each other established narrative frameworks that echoed across myth. Athena's counsel tempered Zeus's decisions. Hermes' mediation facilitated diplomacy. Apollo's foresight complemented Artemis's guardianship. Even conflicts, such as Ares' impulsive violence or Aphrodite's manipulations, served as lessons for mortals, illustrating the consequences of hubris, desire, and impetuosity. Through these divine relationships, humans gained models for ethical behaviour, caution, and aspiration, while the gods reinforced their authority in both visible and subtle ways. The Olympian Pantheon, therefore, was more than a collection of powerful beings. It was a structured hierarchy, a network of influence, and a reflection of the cosmos itself. Each deity represented essential aspects of existence, from intellect and creativity to passion, justice, and transformation. Together, they maintained equilibrium, guided mortals, and exercised authority, ensuring that Olympus functioned not only as a seat of power, but as the fulcrum around which the world turned. In this system, wisdom, might, justice, and chaos were not opposing forces but complementary aspects of an integrated universe. Mortals, navigating life under divine oversight, observed the Pantheon's influence in natural phenomena, human relationships, and the unfolding of destiny. Through the Olympians, the world was both structured and vibrant, subject to order yet capable of surprise, guided by authority yet alive with dynamic interaction. The establishment of the Olympian Pantheon marked the final stage of the gods' consolidation of power. With distinct domains, complementary strengths, and dynamic interactions, the 12 became the foundation of divine authority, ensuring that both the human and cosmic order endured. They were rulers, exemplars, and arbiters, their presence shaping every facet of existence, from the smallest mortal action to the sweeping arc of fate. Love, marriage, and rivalries of the gods. The Olympian Pantheon, though organised and formidable, was not free from tension. Among the gods, relationships were complex, layered with affection, ambition, rivalry, and the exercise of power. Central to these dynamics was the union of Zeus and Hera, a marriage that combined authority, prestige, and political necessity. Though bound by sacred vows, their relationship reflected both harmony and conflict, embodying the intricate interplay of love, control, and consequence among immortals. Zeus, as king of the gods, wielded immense power and influence. His dominion over sky, weather, and law made him the preeminent authority of Olympus. Hera, his sister and consort, governed marriage, familial bonds, and the sanctity of domestic order. Together, they represented the dual pillars of divine governance: Zeus as executor of cosmic authority, Hera as custodian of social and moral structure. Their union was both symbolic and practical, cementing alliances among the Olympians while establishing a framework for the enforcement of law and order on Earth. Yet Zeus's authority was matched by personal desires, and his infidelities were numerous and consequential. His attractions extended to goddesses, nymphs, and mortal women, and these unions produced offspring whose lives were deeply intertwined with mythic events. Each liaison, whether brief or prolonged, initiated a cascade of interactions among gods, mortals, and demigods, shaping the moral and political landscape of Olympus and the human world. Zeus's extramarital affairs underscored both the autonomy and fallibility of even the most powerful god, revealing that desire and ambition were inextricable from authority. Hera's response to Zeus's infidelities was both calculated and forceful. Her wrath, though directed at rivals and illegitimate offspring, was often tempered by political and cosmic considerations, ensuring that her actions reinforced rather than destabilized Olympus's order. Hera's pursuit of vengeance demonstrated the consequences of divine transgression, her interventions serving as moral and cautionary examples for both gods and mortals. The complexity of her responses reflected her intelligence, patience, and strategic thinking. She balanced the preservation of her own dignity with the maintenance of authority across the pantheon. Divine rivalries extended beyond marital discord. Relationships among siblings, peers, and offspring created networks of tension and negotiation. Athena's guidance tempered aggression. Apollo's insight revealed hidden motives, and Artemis's vigilance ensured that balance persisted amid conflict. Even seemingly minor rivalries could escalate into events of cosmic or mortal significance. The interactions of the gods, shaped by pride, desire, and ambition, produced both turbulence and opportunity, influencing the moral, political, and physical landscape of the world. Many of these rivalries had direct consequences for humanity. Offspring of Zeus, born of mortal or divine women, became demigods whose lives intersected with human affairs. These figures, such as Heracles, Perseus, and Helen of Troy, embodied both divine potential and mortal vulnerability. Their struggles, achievements, and tragedies were deeply shaped by the conflicts of their parents and patrons, illustrating that divine rivalries were not contained within Olympus but extended to the world below. Mortals, in turn, became both witnesses and participants in events orchestrated by the gods, their fates intertwined with divine desires and disputes. The consequences of divine infidelity were also cultural and moral. Mortals observed patterns of favoritism, retribution, and reward, learning that virtue, loyalty, and caution could influence divine attention. Zeus' passions often brought both fortune and calamity to humans, reinforcing the principle that life was governed by both mortal action and divine oversight. Hera's interventions, whether protective or punitive, underscored the importance of justice, respect, and obedience within human communities. The moral lessons embedded in these interactions shaped civic structures, religious practices, and cultural norms, linking divine rivalry with the evolution of human society. In addition to marital and familial tensions, the gods competed for honor, recognition, and influence. Ares' belligerence, Athena's strategic wisdom, and Apollo's pursuit of artistic and prophetic supremacy often generated disputes that required negotiation or intervention from Zeus. Even Dionysus and Hestia, though less prone to conflict, exercised influence that could counterbalance more aggressive actors. These interactions demonstrated that the maintenance of order within Olympus required diplomacy, foresight, and at times direct enforcement of authority. The dynamics of rivalry were thus integral to the function of the pantheon, reinforcing hierarchy while allowing flexibility, creativity, and the expression of individual domains. Offspring and mortals who attracted divine attention were frequently drawn into these rivalries. Heroes, demigods and mortals, favoured or punished by Zeus, Hera, or other Olympians, navigated a world shaped by divine competition and alliance. Their quests, battles, and achievements reflected the complex interplay of divine favour, human ambition, and moral consequence. Mythic narratives, as a result, were not only stories of extraordinary deeds, but also reflections of the pervasive influence of love, jealousy, and rivalry among gods, demonstrating that mortal and immortal destinies were inseparable. Hera's strategies often extended to long-term interventions. In some cases, she sought to diminish the influence of Zeus's rivals or to challenge his decisions subtly, preserving her own authority while shaping events in ways that reflected both justice and personal interest. Her actions were measured, reflecting both intelligence and patience, yet they could be devastating to mortals and gods alike. The consequences of divine rivalry were therefore multidimensional, immediate, long-term, moral and political, shaping the course of events across time and space. Ultimately, the love, marriage and rivalries of the gods were central to the structure and narrative of Olympus. Zeus and Hera's union represented authority, stability, and moral order, yet it was constantly tested by desire, ambition, and conflict. Infidelities, revenge, and competition created dynamic tensions that produced heroes, demigods, and mythic events. Divine conflict served as both cautionary and instructive examples, demonstrating that power, passion, and justice were inseparable in the governance of both gods and humans. Through these interactions, mortals learned that life was governed by complex forces. The balance of love, rivalry, and authority among gods shaped both human destiny and cultural practice. The myths of Olympus became enduring narratives, illustrating that the consequences of divine desire, competition, and intervention were mirrored in mortal experience, guiding human understanding of morality, justice, ambition, and resilience. In this way, the Olympians' interpersonal dynamics were not mere indulgences of immortals, but integral mechanisms through which order, morality, and destiny were maintained. Love, marriage, and rivalry became forces of both disruption and guidance, producing narratives that shaped the moral, cultural, and heroic landscape of the human and divine worlds alike. The Chthonic Deities. While the Olympians governed the sky, sea, and mortal affairs, another domain demanded equal attention and reverence: the underworld. This chthonic realm, distant yet intimately connected to life itself, was ruled by Hades and Persephone. Their dominion over death, the afterlife, and the balance of souls underscored the essential equilibrium between creation and cessation, power and consequence, light and darkness. The Chthonic deities, though less celebrated than their Olympian counterparts, were integral to the cosmic order, their influence extending to both mortals and gods. Hades, eldest of the Olympian siblings, yet removed from their quarrels on Olympus, presided over the underworld with unyielding authority. His realm encompassed not only the dead, but the fundamental principle of mortality itself, a necessary counterbalance to the vitality of the living. Hades' power was absolute within his domain, yet he was neither capricious nor malevolent by nature. His justice was impartial, ensuring that each soul received its due according to divine law and the pattern of life led in the mortal world. In governing the dead, Hades maintained the continuity of existence, upholding the principle that death was as integral to cosmic balance as life itself. Persephone, daughter of Demeter, became both queen of the underworld and symbol of cyclical transformation. Her abduction by Hades, though tragic, created a structure in which life and death, growth and dormancy were intertwined. Persephone's dual role, spending part of the year in the underworld and part upon the earth, explained the rhythms of the seasons and the natural order. She became a figure of mediation, bridging the living and the dead, and exemplifying the inescapable relationship between mortality and renewal. Through Persephone, the Chthonic realm maintained a connection to the mortal world, ensuring that death was neither final chaos nor disconnected silence, but a continuation of the cosmic cycle. The underworld itself was a structured and complex domain, divided into regions reflecting the moral and existential condition of the dead. Tartarus, the deepest pit, was reserved for the punishment of titans, criminals against the divine order, and souls requiring eternal retribution. Its depths were guarded and inaccessible to ordinary mortals, emphasizing that certain transgressions could never be reconciled. Elysium, in contrast, was a place of reward and rest for the righteous, the heroic, and the exceptionally virtuous. Here, favoured souls enjoyed peace and contentment, a reflection of their alignment with divine justice during life. Between these extremes lay the Asphodel Meadows, a neutral space for ordinary souls, representing the inevitability of death and the impartiality of fate. Through this tripartite structure, the underworld maintained moral, spiritual, and cosmic equilibrium. Thanatos, personification of death, operated under Hades' authority, ensuring that the cessation of life was orderly and precise. Unlike the capricious fates of some myths, Thanatos' role was consistent, guiding souls from the mortal plane to their appointed realm within the underworld. Hecate, associated with magic, crossroads and liminal spaces, also played a vital role in chthonic governance. She presided over transitions, thresholds, and the supernatural forces that intersected life and death. Together with other underworld figures, Charon, the ferryman, the Erinyes, executors of vengeance, and the spirits of the dead, they ensured that the boundaries between life, death, and the divine were maintained. Death, in the Greek worldview, was not an arbitrary end, but a necessary principle embedded within the order of existence. The presence of Hades and his court reminded mortals that life was finite, that moral choices carried weight beyond temporal experience, and that divine oversight extended into the cessation of corporeal existence. Mortals' conduct, their piety, heroism, or transgression, influenced their fate in the underworld, reinforcing the integration of ethical, cosmic, and spiritual principles. The underworld was thus a locus of moral consequence, an arena in which the balance between reward and punishment, life and death, was enacted. The Chthonic Deities' influence also extended to the living world. Rituals, sacrifices, and prayers for the dead reflected the necessity of respecting the underworld's power. Mortals sought to appease Hades, Persephone, and associated deities, acknowledging that neglect could invite misfortune, unrest, or spiritual disturbance. These practices reinforced social cohesion, moral responsibility, and recognition of mortality. Embedding the underworld's authority into cultural and civic life, The dead, though absent from the living world, remained active participants in the moral and spiritual order, their experiences reinforcing the principles of justice, consequence, and continuity. Hades and Persephone's rule was further defined by the interaction between divine domains. While Olympians exercised authority over living affairs, the underworld maintained independence, its principles sometimes in tension with mortal or Olympian ambition. Heroes who ventured into Hades, such as Heracles, Orpheus or Theseus, experienced firsthand the limits of mortal power and the necessity of respect for death's immutable authority. Even Zeus, with power over law and fate, deferred to Hades within the chthonic domain, illustrating that authority was distributed according to cosmic necessity rather than sheer might alone. The underworld also reflected themes of transformation and continuity. Persephone's seasonal return to the living world exemplified the cycles inherent in existence. Death did not annihilate, and life was renewed through patterns of dormancy and growth. Mortals, observing these rhythms, gained understanding of mortality as a natural process rather than a purely tragic event. Death, guided by the Chthonic Deities, became a principle that reinforced cosmic order, ensuring that life and its cessation were mutually meaningful, ethically coherent, and divinely overseen. In this context, the Chthonic Deities were indispensable to the Greek cosmology. Hades and Persephone maintained equilibrium, Thanatos enforced mortality, Hecate mediated thresholds, and Tartarus, Elysium, and Asphodel provided structure to the afterlife. Mortals and gods alike recognized that death was integral to existence, and the underworld's authority was foundational to the coherence of the universe. By regulating the flow of souls, enforcing moral consequence, and illustrating the inescapable link between life and death, the Chthonic deities preserved balance, justice, and cosmic continuity. Thus, the underworld was neither a place of mere despair nor a distant abstraction. It was an active, structured, and morally integrated domain, essential to the function of Olympus and the experience of mortals. Life and death were inseparable. Divine authority extended into both realms, and the governance of the Chthonic deities ensured that the cosmic order remained intact. In their oversight, the Greek worldview articulated a profound understanding that mortality, justice, and transformation were fundamental components of existence, and that the underworld's power was as vital as the Olympians' dominion over sky and earth. See deities and other powers. While Olympus dominated the sky and the underworld presided over the dead, the oceans, rivers, and all bodies of water were realms of power and influence unto themselves. Central among these domains was Poseidon, god of the sea, whose authority encompassed storms, earthquakes, and all maritime phenomena. Poseidon's dominion extended beyond mere physical waters. He was also a regulator of naval fortune, a shaper of heroic journeys, and a figure whose temper reflected the unpredictability and magnitude of the oceans themselves. Poseidon, brother to Zeus and Hades, was a deity whose power complemented and sometimes rivaled that of his siblings. While Zeus governed the sky and Hades the underworld, Poseidon's influence was immediate and tangible to mortals, for their survival often depended upon the favour of the seas. Sailors, fishermen, and coastal communities recognized his capacity for both blessing and destruction. Calm waters, favorable winds, and bountiful harvests of the sea were seen as gifts, whereas storms, shipwrecks, and flooding testified to Poseidon's anger or caprice. This duality made him a god of respect, fear, and reverence, one whose personality mirrored the vast, unpredictable, and powerful nature of the oceans he commanded. Poseidon was aided by a cadre of subordinate deities, each responsible for different aspects of marine life and phenomena. Nereus, often referred to as the Old Man of the Sea, possessed knowledge, prophecy, and wisdom regarding the ocean's depths. His guidance was sought by gods and mortals alike, and his children, the Nereids, personified various facets of the sea, from waves to currents to aspects of marine beauty. These entities, numerous and diverse, were not merely decorative figures, but functional powers that embodied the multiplicity and complexity of oceanic forces. Their presence underscored that the seas were not a singular, static domain, but a dynamic, interconnected system influenced by divine and natural law. Triton, son of Poseidon, served as messenger and intermediary of the seas. With his conch shell, he could calm or raise storms, signalling the will of Poseidon to mortals and gods alike. Triton's role demonstrated that the sea was an organized, governed force, not merely chaotic and capricious. He acted as an agent of both communication and enforcement, ensuring that Poseidon's authority was recognized across the waters, and that the balance of maritime phenomena was maintained. Through Triton, mortals could observe a tangible expression of divine control over otherwise inscrutable natural forces. The seas were also home to monsters and hazards that tested human courage, ingenuity, and divine favour. Scylla and Charybdis, twin perils of navigation, embodied danger and inevitability. Scylla, with her multiple heads, preyed upon those who drew too close to her rocky lair, while Charybdis, a massive whirlpool, threatened to consume entire ships. Together they illustrated the duality of the sea as both nurturing and destructive. Cetus, a monstrous sea creature often associated with mythic punishments or trials, demonstrated that the oceans were not only resources, but also arenas of moral and heroic challenge. Encounters with these entities emphasized that the seas were morally charged spaces, where courage, divine favor, and adherence to cosmic order could determine survival or catastrophe. Mortals' interaction with the sea reflected its centrality in Greek life and myth. Journeys across the ocean, whether for trade, exploration, or heroic quest, required careful attention to ritual, prayer, and observance of Poseidon's domain. Sacrifices and offerings to sea deities were common, acknowledging both dependence on and vulnerability to marine forces. The sea was a conduit for adventure and knowledge, yet it was simultaneously a reminder of mortality, unpredictability, and the necessity of humility before forces beyond human control. Heroes such as Odysseus, Jason, and Theseus encountered the sea not merely as geography, but as a dynamic, morally charged environment. Its hazards and wonders reflecting divine order and the balance of power across realms. The significance of oceans extended beyond the practical to the symbolic. Water represented movement, transformation, and boundary. It was the medium through which journeys of life and death occurred, connecting islands, continents, and mythic narratives, Rivers flowed from the underworld, merging with the seas. Storms and currents could alter the fates of nations. In Greek thought, the sea was simultaneously a place of opportunity, peril, and divine interaction, a mirror of both human ambition and the governance of gods. Through Poseidon's authority, the oceans became a controlled, comprehensible force, though never fully predictable, embodying the principle that power was exercised through mastery, respect, and adaptation rather than absolute control. Other sea deities, minor yet essential, illustrated the complexity of the marine pantheon. Oceanus, a primordial titan, personified the outer encircling river and the totality of water surrounding the world. Pontus represented the deep sea itself, while various river gods, nymphs, and spirits mediated the interaction of fresh water, salt water, and human habitation. Together, these entities emphasized that Greek mythology regarded the sea as an intricate network of forces, each with its own character, influence, and narrative potential. The oceans were neither uniform nor inert, but filled with divinely mediated energy that shaped mortal and cosmic affairs alike. Poseidon's interactions with other gods further highlighted the role of the sea in divine politics. He could support or hinder mortals in alignment with Zeus's broader plans, act in competition with other Olympians, or intervene independently to assert his authority. The sea became a stage for the negotiation of power, where storms, earthquakes, and maritime hazards reflected both divine will and cosmic balance. The interplay between Poseidon and other Olympians demonstrated that each domain, whether sky, underworld, or sea, was interconnected, with influence radiating outward and consequences reverberating across realms. Ultimately, the sea deities embodied the principle that natural forces were not impersonal, but invested with moral, spiritual, and cosmic significance. Poseidon and his followers shaped the physical world while reinforcing divine order, ethical consequence, and heroic opportunity. Mortals navigated these waters with care, ritual, and courage, understanding that survival and success depended on insight, preparation, and favour. The oceans, vast and unpredictable, were a reflection of the world itself, immense, powerful, and governed by laws that demanded recognition, respect, and adaptability. Through Poseidon, Triton, the Nereids, and the pantheon of sea powers, the Greek worldview integrated natural phenomena with moral and cosmic order. The oceans were not merely physical spaces, but moral and narrative arenas, where divine authority, human agency, and heroic endeavour intersected. The sea's significance, therefore, extended beyond geography into the ethical, cultural, and mythic fabric of the world, illustrating the deep interconnection between gods, mortals, and the elemental forces that shaped life and destiny. The early heroes, the consolidation of divine authority, and the establishment of cosmic order created a world in which mortals could rise to prominence, sometimes through courage, sometimes through divine favour. From this context emerged the early heroes, figures whose deeds bridged the realms of gods and humans, embodying ideals of valour, ingenuity, and moral complexity. These figures did not merely reflect mortal aspiration. They shaped culture, inspired reverence, and illustrated the intricate interplay of divine influence and human agency. Perseus, son of Zeus, and the mortal Danae became one of the most iconic exemplars of heroism. His most celebrated feat, the slaying of Medusa, represented the confrontation of mortality with the supernatural and the triumph of intellect and courage over danger. Medusa, a gorgon whose gaze could turn men to stone, was both monstrous and divinely sanctioned, a testament to the peril inherent in defying cosmic and moral boundaries. Perseus' success relied not solely on his strength, but on strategic thinking, divine gifts, and careful execution. He received assistance from Hermes, who provided a sword, and Athena, who supplied a reflective shield. This partnership between mortal hero and divine benefactors underscored the essential principle that heroism in Greek myth was inseparable from divine involvement, yet required human initiative to manifest fully. Bellerophon, another early hero, exemplified the union of bravery and ingenuity in confronting formidable challenges. Known for taming the winged horse Pegasus, Bellerophon accomplished deeds that were impossible for ordinary mortals. With Pegasus, he defeated the Chimera, a monstrous creature whose combination of lion, goat, and serpent elements made it a symbol of chaotic danger. Bellerophon's triumphs demonstrated that mastery over extraordinary circumstances demanded both skill and moral fortitude. Yet his story also contained warnings. Hubris and the overreaching of mortal limits could provoke divine retribution, reminding audiences that heroism was bounded by respect for the cosmic order and the authority of the gods. Atalanta, a heroine distinguished by both skill and determination, participated in the Caledonian boar hunt, a legendary expedition that highlighted both human cooperation and competitive excellence. Her speed, precision, and courage allowed her to confront a monstrous boar sent by Artemis to punish King Oeneus for neglecting proper sacrifice. Atalanta's participation was remarkable in a culture often emphasizing male heroism, illustrating that courage, talent, and divine favor were not constrained by gender. Through her deeds, the narrative emphasized the recognition of merit, the interplay of divine influence, and the importance of collaboration among heroes to achieve extraordinary results. The feats of these early heroes were embedded within a broader moral and cultural framework. Each encounter with monsters or formidable tasks was both literal and symbolic. A confrontation with chaos, mortality, and divine will. Success required not merely physical strength, but intelligence, resourcefulness, and the ability to integrate divine assistance into action. Through these stories, Greek myth articulated ideals of heroism that combined courage, prudence, and ethical responsibility, demonstrating that mortal excellence was possible within the parameters of cosmic order. Heroic narratives also highlighted the consequences of choice, the limits of power, and the nature of fame. Perseus' use of Medusa's head to save Andromeda emphasized the responsibility inherent in wielding extraordinary means. Bellerophon's eventual fall from favor illustrated the dangers of arrogance and the need for humility even after great achievement. Atalanta's recognition for her skill demonstrated that acknowledgement of merit could transcend social conventions, yet also required adherence to divine and communal expectations. Together, these narratives reinforced the idea that heroism was a measure of both ability and ethical discernment. Divine interaction remained central to the development of early heroes. Zeus, Athena, Hermes, and Artemis all played roles in shaping outcomes, providing tools, guidance, and intervention. However, the mortal initiative was essential. Without courage, intelligence, and perseverance, divine gifts alone could not secure success. This reciprocal relationship emphasized the interdependence of gods and humans, illustrating that heroism existed at the intersection of mortal action and divine favor. Heroes were agents of change within a world governed by divine principles. Yet their achievements reflected personal merit, initiative, and adherence to the moral and strategic requirements of each challenge. The early heroes also established a narrative template for subsequent generations. Their actions defined the parameters of excellence, bravery, and ethical conduct, creating a standard against which later figures, demigods, and mortals could be measured. Perseus' courage, Bellerophon's ingenuity, and Atalanta's skill provided exemplars of what could be achieved when mortal ambition aligned with divine favour. At the same time, the consequences of failure, misjudgment, or hubris reinforced the principle that extraordinary deeds carried proportional responsibility, and that the hero's path was neither guaranteed nor without peril. Heroism in this context was more than physical achievement. It encompassed moral discernment, the capacity for strategic thought, and the ability to navigate complex networks of divine and mortal forces. Each early hero's journey demonstrated that courage alone was insufficient. Prudence, respect for cosmic and divine law, and recognition of ethical consequence were equally vital. The stories of Perseus, Bellerophon, and Atalanta thus communicated enduring principles. The integration of skill, morality, and courage, and the recognition that extraordinary human action was both a reflection of and a contribution to the broader cosmic order. The shaping of heroism through these early figures had long-term implications for Greek culture and mythic consciousness. Heroes became mediators between the mortal and divine worlds, agents through which humans could witness the exercise of extraordinary virtue, the consequences of transgression, and the operation of divine justice. Through their deeds, mortals were offered models for courage, ingenuity, and ethical action, while gods reinforced the principle that human initiative, guided by respect for divine authority, could achieve remarkable outcomes. The early heroes of Greek mythology exemplified the intricate interplay between divine influence and human agency. Perseus confronted supernatural peril with courage and strategy. Bellerophon harnessed extraordinary tools to overcome chaos, and Atalanta demonstrated skill and merit within a collective endeavour. Their narratives articulated the principles of heroism: courage, prudence, moral discernment, and the integration of mortal initiative with divine guidance. Through these figures, Greek myth established enduring standards for human excellence and the framework through which heroism, fate, and the influence of gods were understood. Heracles and His Labors. Among the pantheon of heroes, few embodied the intersection of divine power and mortal endeavour as completely as Heracles. Son of Zeus and the mortal Alcmene, Heracles' existence was defined by both extraordinary potential and relentless adversity. His birth set the stage for a life in which divine favour and divine enmity were inextricably intertwined, illustrating the profound influence of the gods on human destiny. From the outset, Hera, Queen of the Gods, viewed Heracles with hostility. His lineage as a son of Zeus threatened her authority and provoked jealousy, motivating her to inflict suffering upon him in ways both subtle and catastrophic. Hera's wrath manifested early, attempting to destroy Heracles even as an infant. Her interference signalled the pervasive nature of divine influence in mortal life, where the whims of gods could determine survival, opportunity, and fate. Despite these challenges, Heracles survived, nurtured by mortal caregivers and divine guidance, displaying from the earliest moments the extraordinary resilience and strength that would define his existence. His upbringing emphasized preparation for trials of both body and character, teaching lessons of endurance, cunning, and moral discernment necessary for navigating a world dominated by gods and heroic imperatives. The 12 Labors of Heracles stand as the defining arc of his heroic narrative. Commissioned as penance for the madness imposed by Hera, which drove him to kill his own wife and children, these labours combined physical challenge, moral testing, and cosmic significance. Each labour, from slaying the Nemean lion to capturing the Erymanthian boar, cleaning the Augean stables, and retrieving the golden apples of the Hesperides, was more than a test of brute strength. They were symbolic confrontations with chaos, mortality, and divine expectation. Through these labours, Heracles demonstrated that heroism encompassed courage, intelligence, and ethical resolve, reflecting both personal merit and the influence of divine forces shaping the cosmos. The labours also revealed the multifaceted nature of Heracles' character. Physical strength alone was insufficient. Ingenuity, patience, and strategic thinking were equally vital. In cleaning the Augean stables, for example, Heracles employed rivers to achieve a seemingly impossible task, demonstrating that intellect and planning could amplify raw power. Similarly, in capturing the Ceryneian hind or the Erymanthian boar, he balanced assertiveness with restraint, illustrating that ethical discernment was a crucial aspect of heroic conduct. Through these narratives, Greek myth articulated a model of heroism that integrated physical, moral, and intellectual excellence, reflecting the complexity of human and divine interaction. Heracles' role as a bridge between divine and mortal spheres was particularly evident in his interactions with gods and supernatural entities. He received assistance from Athena, who offered guidance and tools, from Hermes, who provided strategic advice, and from Apollo, Artemis, and other deities who facilitated the completion of tasks. Yet these gifts did not diminish the necessity of mortal initiative. Heracles' achievements were contingent upon his courage, perseverance, and judgment, underscoring that divine favour, while potent, required human action to manifest effectively. This interdependence emphasized the Greek conception of heroism as a collaborative process between the mortal and divine, where outcomes were shaped by character, skill, and ethical choices as much as by supernatural support. The meaning of the labours extended beyond immediate feats. Each labour symbolised a confrontation with aspects of the natural and moral order that threatened cosmic or societal stability. The Nemean lion represented invulnerability and untamed force. The Lernaean hydra, regenerative chaos. The capture of Cerberus, the confrontation with death itself. Heracles' victories were not merely personal triumphs, but interventions in the maintenance of order, illustrating that heroism had societal, cosmic, and moral significance. Through his labours, Heracles demonstrated that mortal action, aligned with divine principles, could restore balance and uphold the structures of both Olympus and the human world. Heracles' life also encompassed lessons in humility and consequence. Despite his strength and divine parentage, he was vulnerable to error, hubris, and manipulation. The madness induced by Hera, the burden of atonement, and the dangers inherent in his labours emphasised that heroism required endurance, moral awareness, and the capacity to navigate forces beyond one's control. Success was therefore both a personal achievement and a reflection of adherence to divine and cosmic laws, illustrating the ethical dimensions inherent in Greek mythic heroism. The culmination of Heracles' mortal existence was his apotheosis. Following his death, caused indirectly by a poisoned garment, itself a product of human and divine entanglement, Heracles was granted immortality, ascending to Olympus and joining the ranks of the gods. This transformation represented the ultimate reconciliation of mortal endeavour and divine recognition. Through apotheosis, Heracles became a model not only of human heroism, but also of the potential for integration with the divine. His elevation demonstrated that extraordinary mortal action, shaped by courage, intelligence, and ethical conduct, could transcend ordinary human limits, bridging the realms of life, death, and divinity. Heracles' immortality also reinforced the interconnection of narrative, morality, and cosmic order. His story illustrated that heroism was multidimensional. It encompassed physical prowess, ethical integrity, endurance in the face of suffering, and collaboration with divine authority. By completing the 12 Labors, enduring personal tragedy, and ultimately achieving apotheosis, Heracles' narrative embodied principles that shaped Greek culture, moral philosophy, and religious understanding. He was simultaneously a protector of human and cosmic order, a mediator between gods and mortals, and a symbol of the potential for transcendence through action aligned with justice and courage. Furthermore, Heracles' legacy influenced subsequent myths, heroic narratives, and cultural ideals. His offspring, both mortal and divine, continued the interplay of human initiative and divine influence, shaping the trajectories of cities, nations, and subsequent generations of heroes. Festivals, cults, and artistic depictions celebrated his feats, reinforcing the values of courage, ingenuity, endurance, and moral responsibility. Through these cultural expressions, the lessons of Heracles' life and labours were transmitted across generations, ensuring that heroism remained central to Greek ethical and mythological consciousness. Ultimately, Heracles represented a synthesis of human potential and divine influence, a figure whose life and labours demonstrated that the boundaries between mortality and divinity were permeable under conditions of courage, intelligence, and moral integrity. His narrative illustrated the consequences of divine interaction, the responsibilities of extraordinary power, and the capacity for human action to achieve cosmic significance. In Heracles, Greek myth articulated a vision of heroism that was enduring, ethically complex, and deeply integrated into the moral and cosmic fabric of the world. Theseus and the rise of Athens. Amid the pantheon of early heroes, Theseus emerged as a figure whose deeds not only exemplified personal courage, but also shaped the civic and cultural identity of Athens. Born to Aegeus, king of Athens, and Aethra, daughter of Pythias. Theseus's lineage established him as a bridge between mortal governance and heroic endeavour. His story was defined by a series of trials, confrontations with chaos, and the assertion of moral and physical authority, ultimately positioning him as the founding hero of a city destined for prominence in the Greek world. Theseus's early life foreshadowed his extraordinary destiny. Aware of the challenges posed by his heritage and the expectations of his father, Theseus embarked on a journey to Athens that would both test and reveal his heroic qualities. This journey was punctuated by encounters with a series of bandits and malefactors, each representing forces of disorder, greed, and violence that threatened travellers and communities alike. By confronting and overcoming these adversaries, Periphetes with his iron club, Sinis the pine bender, Siren with his predatory cliffs, and Procrustes with his bed of cruel exactitude, Theseus demonstrated the essential attributes of a hero: courage, ingenuity, and ethical discernment. Each victory reinforced the principle that heroism required more than strength alone. It demanded judgment, foresight, and the capacity to impose order upon chaos. The journey to Athens also underscored the integration of mortal initiative with divine influence. While Theseus acted decisively in overcoming mortal threats, his heritage as the son of Aegeus implied the latent support of the city's royal and divine authority. Theseus's actions established his legitimacy as a ruler-hero, illustrating that heroic deeds were inseparable from both lineage and ethical conduct. In his confrontations with disorder, he symbolically prepared for the greater responsibilities that awaited him in Athens. The establishment of civic stability, moral authority, and the protection of the community from both external and internal threats. The most celebrated episode of Theseus's narrative was his confrontation with the Minotaur, a monstrous hybrid creature dwelling within the labyrinth of Crete. The Minotaur, born of Pasiphae and a divine bull, represented both a literal and symbolic threat, a product of divine curse, human error, and uncontrollable violence. Each year, Athens was compelled to send a tribute of youths to Crete, a ritual of submission and suffering, reflecting both political and divine hierarchies. Theseus's voluntary participation marked a turning point, as he assumed responsibility for confronting a threat imposed by both human and divine forces. The labyrinth itself, a creation of Daedalus, symbolized complexity, entrapment, and the challenge of navigating a world shaped by ingenuity, hazard, and moral consequence. Within this intricate construct, Theseus demonstrated not only physical strength, but also intelligence, courage, and foresight. By employing the thread provided by Ariadne, daughter of King Minos, Theseus ensured his safe navigation of the maze, illustrating the necessity of prudence and strategic planning in heroism. His victory over the Minotaur was both a literal triumph and a moral statement. The imposition of order upon chaos, the rescue of the oppressed, and the assertion of ethical authority in the face of existential threat. Theseus's return to Athens, following the slaying of the Minotaur, marked his emergence as a founder hero whose deeds consolidated both personal and civic authority. He exemplified the qualities necessary for leadership: courage in the face of danger, strategic intelligence, and ethical discernment. Through his actions, Athens gained not merely a hero, but a moral and political exemplar, whose presence reinforced the city's identity as a centre of order, culture, and heroic virtue. Theseus's narrative thus bridged the realms of individual heroism and civic foundation, illustrating how personal deeds could shape the destiny of communities and the moral consciousness of generations. The story of Theseus also emphasized the role of collaboration and counsel in heroic achievement. Ariadne's guidance, divine or moral, and the support of allies reflected the principle that heroism, while centered on individual courage and initiative, was embedded within a network of relationships, advice, and strategic assistance. The integration of human agency with external guidance reinforced the broader Greek understanding that the success of mortals, particularly those of heroic stature, depended upon both personal virtue and the ability to navigate the influences of gods, mentors, and community. Theseus's deeds extended beyond the defeat of monsters and the establishment of civic authority. His subsequent actions in consolidating Athens, unifying Attica, and instituting moral and legal reforms illustrated the broader scope of heroism as a principle shaping societal order. By integrating personal valor with political and ethical responsibility, Theseus embodied the ideal that heroes were not merely agents of chaos resolution, but architects of social stability, exemplars of civic virtue, and mediators between mortal ambition and divine will. The narrative of Theseus also reflected themes of moral consequence and the dangers of hubris. His failures, misjudgments, or overreaching, whether in matters of personal judgment, political ambition, or interaction with divine forces, served as cautionary elements, emphasizing that heroism carried responsibilities and that even extraordinary figures were subject to moral and cosmic laws. Theseus's story balanced triumph with the persistent awareness of limitation, illustrating that ethical discernment was as vital to heroism as courage or strength. Ultimately, Theseus' significance lay in his dual role as both a heroic individual and a founder figure. His deeds against bandits, monsters, and existential threats established the narrative of moral and physical courage. His actions in Athens created a lasting framework for civic identity, law, and cultural memory. In Theseus, the Greeks articulated the principle that heroism was both personal and collective, that the courage to confront danger must be coupled with wisdom to govern justly, and that the foundation of society required moral and strategic insight as much as physical prowess. Through the life and deeds of Theseus, Greek myth illustrated the integration of mortal initiative, divine influence, and civic responsibility. His journey to Athens, triumph over the Minotaur, and establishment of a heroic legacy demonstrated that heroes were not merely instruments of fate or divine favour, but active participants in shaping the moral, civic, and cosmic order. Theseus exemplified the enduring principles of courage, prudence, and ethical leaderships, leaving a model for both mortals and demigods in the understanding of heroism, governance, and the interconnection of human and divine destiny. The Trojan Cycle. The Trojan Cycle stands as one of the most profound narratives in Greek mythology, illustrating the convergence of human ambition, divine intervention, and heroic endeavour. The story begins with the judgment of Paris, an event that set in motion a sequence of conflicts that would culminate in the legendary Trojan War. Eris, the goddess of discord, cast a golden apple inscribed with the words, "To the fairest among the gods at the wedding of Peleus and Thetis." The claim to this apple was contested by Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, each representing different dimensions of power, wisdom, and beauty. Paris, Prince of Troy, was selected to adjudicate the dispute. His decision, swayed by the promise of Helen, the most beautiful mortal woman, granted to him by Aphrodite, revealed the potent interplay between divine favour and mortal choice. The judgment of Paris exemplified the manner in which human action, even when influenced by divine promise, could generate consequences of epic magnitude, shaping destinies and drawing the gods into mortal affairs. The abduction of Helen, whether by seduction or force, created a crisis that transcended personal grievance and became a catalyst for war. Helen, regarded as the embodiment of beauty and political significance, was both a prize and a symbol of honour for those who sought her return. Her abduction mobilized a coalition of Greek kings, led by Agamemnon, to wage war against Troy. This event underscored the significance of honour, reputation, and political alliances in the heroic age, illustrating that personal actions could resonate through social, political, and divine networks. The pursuit of Helen was not merely a quest for retribution, but a fulfillment of oaths and obligations, emphasizing the interconnectedness of human duty, moral responsibility, and the dictates of honour in the Greek mythic imagination. The Trojan War itself became a stage for both mortal heroism and divine intervention. Heroes on both sides, Achilles, Hector, Ajax, and Aeneas, demonstrated extraordinary prowess, courage, and strategic skill. Yet their actions were continually shaped by the influence of gods and goddesses, whose favoritism, rivalry, and agendas altered the course of battle. Zeus, Hera, Athena, Apollo, and other deities exercised their power to aid or hinder, reflecting the Greek understanding that mortal initiative and divine will were inseparable in the pursuit of heroic accomplishment. The war illustrated that heroism was not merely a function of strength or courage, but of the ability to navigate a network of moral, strategic, and supernatural factors, balancing personal ambition with ethical responsibility and divine expectation. The wrath of Achilles serves as a central narrative element in the Trojan Cycle, illustrating the interplay of emotion, honour, and fate. Insulted by Agamemnon, who appropriated Briseis, Achilles withdrew from battle, demonstrating the significance of personal pride and moral grievance in shaping heroic action. His absence from the battlefield resulted in great suffering for the Greek forces, highlighting the consequences of individual emotion upon collective outcomes. When Achilles eventually returned, his actions were decisive, culminating in feats of extraordinary strength, skill, and strategic brilliance. The slaughter of Hector and other Trojans reflected the inexorable power of wrath combined with heroism, and the narrative emphasized that human emotion, when intertwined with exceptional capability, could alter the trajectory of war and determine the fate of nations. The fall of Troy, as a consequence of cunning and strategic planning, illustrated the integration of heroism, intelligence, and divine involvement. The ruse of the wooden horse, conceived by Odysseus and executed with cooperation from other Greek heroes, demonstrated that victory was achieved not solely through brute strength, but through ingenuity, ethical navigation of circumstance and the ability to manipulate perception. The destruction of the city, while tragic, reinforced the principle that heroic action required the combination of intellectual insight, moral calculation, and strategic initiative. Divine intervention remained critical. Athena and Poseidon favoured the Greeks in various moments, while Apollo and other gods supported the Trojans, ensuring that the conflict remained a complex interplay of mortal and divine forces, with outcomes shaped by both skill and cosmic will. Throughout the Trojan Cycle, the narrative consistently highlighted the moral and ethical dimensions of heroism. Decisions made by leaders, warriors, and advisors reflected a balance between personal ambition, adherence to oaths, and recognition of divine influence. Heroes such as Achilles embodied both the highest potential of human capability and the consequences of moral and emotional failings, while figures like Hector demonstrated honour, courage, and devotion to duty, even in the face of overwhelming odds. These narratives illustrated that heroism was multidimensional. It required courage, intelligence, moral discernment, and the capacity to navigate both human and divine expectations. Divine involvement in the Trojan Cycle served multiple functions. Gods acted as enforcers of cosmic justice, arbiters of moral consequence, and agents ensuring the fulfillment of destiny. Zeus, as arbiter of fate, maintained the overarching balance, while other deities manipulated events to reflect their own agendas or ethical principles. Mortals were seldom autonomous. Their success or failure depended on both their capabilities and their alignment with divine will. This dynamic emphasized the Greek understanding that heroism, victory, and moral consequence were inseparable from the broader cosmic order, and that human action, while meaningful, was continuously interpreted, tested, and influenced by divine authority. The narrative also explored the consequences of ambition, pride, and desire. Helen's abduction, the quest for honour, and the pursuit of glory illustrated the duality of heroic pursuit. It could lead to triumph, fame, and societal consolidation, but it could also generate suffering, destruction, and loss. The Trojan War exemplified the intricate balance between reward and consequence, showing that heroism was inseparable from ethical and strategic calculation, and that actions motivated by desire, pride, or vengeance could reverberate far beyond immediate circumstances. The Trojan Cycle represented the apex of heroic narrative in Greek mythology, integrating divine influence, mortal initiative, and ethical complexity. The judgment of Paris, the abduction of Helen, the wrath of Achilles, and the fall of Troy demonstrated that heroism was multidimensional, encompassing courage, intelligence, moral discernment, and strategic insight. Mortals acted within a web of divine will, cosmic law, and ethical responsibility, their deeds shaping the fate of nations and the moral fabric of the world. The Trojan Cycle thus illustrated the interdependence of human and divine action, the consequences of ambition and emotion, and the enduring significance of heroism in the Greek understanding of history, morality, and cosmic order. The aftermath of Troy. The fall of Troy marked the culmination of the Trojan Cycle, yet it was not the conclusion of its narrative. The aftermath revealed the enduring consequences of war, the fragility of human ambition, and the continuing interplay between mortal action and divine influence. The immediate years following the sacking of the city were dominated by journeys, betrayals, and the dispersal of survivors. Each story illustrating the complexities of heroism, fate, and the transition from the heroic age to a new era of mortal civilization. Among the most notable post-war narratives was the prolonged wanderings of Odysseus. Renowned for his cunning, strategic acumen, and resilience, Odysseus's return to Ithaca was neither swift nor guaranteed. His journey, famously chronicled in the Odyssey, presented a series of trials that tested intellect, endurance, and moral discernment. Encounters with the Lotus Eaters, the Cyclops Polyphemus, the sorceress Circe, and the Sirens illustrated the multifaceted nature of heroic endeavour. Triumph required not only physical prowess, but also mental agility, prudence, and ethical judgment. Odysseus's wanderings underscored that heroism extended beyond battlefield glory, encompassing navigation of uncertainty, temptation, and complex moral landscapes. His journey also highlighted the role of divine intervention, with gods such as Athena and Poseidon actively shaping outcomes according to their favour or enmity. The wanderings of Odysseus, therefore, symbolised the intricate interdependence of mortal capability, divine will, and the ethical exercise of intelligence and restraint. While Odysseus faced trials at sea, the tragedy of Agamemnon's return to Mycenae demonstrated the dangers inherent in hubris, familial conflict, and moral misjudgment. Agamemnon, the commander of the Greek coalition, returned from Troy expecting honour and restoration, only to encounter betrayal and death at the hands of his wife Clytemnestra and her lover Aegisthus. This narrative illuminated the enduring consequences of personal and political decisions, revealing that the heroism of war did not necessarily translate into security or moral triumph at home. The murder of Agamemnon reflected the inescapable consequences of human action, the cyclical nature of vengeance, and the persistent interplay between ethical conduct, societal stability, and divine oversight. Even heroes, though favoured in battle, were not immune to the ethical and cosmic principles that govern the Greek mythic universe. The survival and legacy of Aeneas provided a complementary narrative, emphasising the continuity of heroic influence and the foundation of new cultural and political structures. Aeneas, a Trojan prince, escaped the destruction of his city and undertook a journey that would ultimately lead to the founding of a lineage destined to shape the Mediterranean world. His survival represented the endurance of heroic values, piety, courage, and adherence to divine guidance. Beyond the immediate battlefield, Aeneas's narrative illustrated that heroism encompassed responsibility to future generations and the maintenance of moral and cultural principles under adverse circumstances. In establishing a new domain, he exemplified the principle that the impact of heroic action could extend beyond personal glory, influencing the trajectory of civilizations and the moral order of human societies. The aftermath of Troy also symbolized the fading of the heroic age. With the deaths of legendary warriors, the decline of ancient city-states, and the dispersal of survivors, the era in which heroes routinely shaped events through extraordinary action drew to a close. Mortals continued to encounter challenges and dangers, yet the scale and intensity of divine mortality interaction that characterized earlier narratives diminished. The stories of wanderers, exiles, and survivors reflected a transition from epic heroism to practical governance, the establishment of familial and civic institutions, and the integration of ethical principles into daily life. The heroic age, once defined by extraordinary feats and direct divine involvement, gave way to a more measured period in which human initiative operated within established social and cosmic frameworks. This transitional period emphasized both continuity and transformation. The legacies of Troy, Odysseus' cunning, Agamemnon's cautionary fate, and Aeneas' foundation of new communities, provided models of behaviour, morality, and strategic thinking for future generations. Heroes continued to serve as exemplars of virtue, courage, and intelligence, yet their influence became mediated through narrative, cultural memory, and the codification of ethical norms. The enduring presence of divine forces in these stories reminded audiences that mortal action was always observed, tested, and influenced by the cosmos, even as the direct interventions of gods became less pronounced with the fading of the heroic age. The narratives of post-Trojan War figures also explored themes of justice, restitution, and moral consequence. Odysseus' trials reflected the pursuit of restoration and the ethical navigation of circumstance. Agamemnon's death illustrated the repercussions of hubris and betrayal, and Aeneas' survival and foundation of new societies highlighted the importance of responsibility, foresight, and adherence to cosmic and social principles. Together, these stories emphasize that heroism, though evolving, remained grounded in the interplay of human action, moral discernment, and divine oversight. The lessons of the Trojan aftermath shaped the cultural understanding of ethical leadership, strategic thinking, and the limits and responsibilities of power. The post-war period also provided a framework for understanding the persistence of mythic influence in human affairs. The deeds, decisions, and legacies of these figures continued to inform political, cultural, and ethical norms. Heroes of the Trojan aftermath became symbols of resilience, prudence, and strategic acumen, illustrating that the consequences of extraordinary action extended across generations. Through the preservation of their narratives, Greek culture codified principles of conduct, governance, and moral discernment, ensuring that the lessons of heroism were transmitted even as the heroic age itself receded into memory. Ultimately, the aftermath of Troy represented both an ending and a beginning. The physical destruction of the city concluded an era of direct conflict and divine mortal confrontation. Yet the journeys, deaths, and survival of its participants established patterns of moral, civic, and heroic continuity. Odysseus, Agamemnon, and Aeneas each contributed to the transition from heroic spectacle to enduring legacy, ensuring that the principles of courage, intelligence, ethical responsibility, and divine awareness remained central to Greek understanding of history and human endeavour. The fading of the heroic age marked a shift from episodic epic heroism to the codification of cultural values and the integration of heroic principles into the ongoing fabric of human society. The aftermath of Troy illustrated the complexity of human and divine interaction, the consequences of ambition and moral choice, and the transition from the heroic age to a more stabilized historical and cultural period. The wanderings of Odysseus, the tragedy of Agamemnon, and the survival and foundation of Aeneas highlighted both continuity and transformation in Greek mythology. These narratives emphasized the enduring significance of heroism, ethical discernment, and strategic action while signalling the decline of a period dominated by extraordinary individual exploits. The post-Trojan world thus bridged the era of gods and heroes with the evolving realities of human civilization, preserving the moral, cultural, and cosmic lessons of myth for generations to come. The legacy of myth. The stories of Greek mythology, spanning the origins of the cosmos, the rise of gods, and the deeds of mortal and heroic figures, did not end with the heroic age or the fall of Troy. Rather, they continued to evolve, transitioning from narrative accounts of divine and mortal interaction into complex systems of belief, ritual practice, and cultural memory. The legacy of myth was as much in its transformation into classical religion as it was in its enduring capacity to illuminate human experience, ethical reflection, and the cosmic order. Following the establishment of the Olympian Pantheon and the conclusion of the heroic age, Greek society increasingly codified its myths into religious and ritual frameworks. Temples were constructed to honour gods and heroes. Sacrifices, festivals, and civic ceremonies reflected the integration of narrative, morality, and social cohesion. Myth became intertwined with everyday life, providing explanations for natural phenomena, legitimizing political authority, and offering ethical guidance. Stories of Zeus's governance, Athena's wisdom, and Apollo's foresight shaped civic ideals, emphasizing the interdependence of divine authority and human endeavor. Myths thus functioned as both entertainment and instruction, offering models for virtue, courage, and piety, while embedding the divine within the fabric of social and cultural practice. The development of Orphic and mystery traditions further transformed myth into structured spiritual and philosophical systems. Orphism, with its emphasis on purification, the soul's journey, and ethical conduct, recast familiar narratives into a framework that addressed mortality, reincarnation, and moral accountability. Myths of the Titanomachy, the creation of humans, and the punishment of Prometheus acquired new significance, illustrating the consequences of transgression and the potential for spiritual transcendence. Mystery cults, such as those dedicated to Demeter and Dionysus, used mythic narratives to guide initiation, ethical reflection, and ritualized experience, allowing adherents to participate in cosmic and moral principles firsthand. Through these practices, myths were not merely stories, but pathways to understanding the relationship between mortal life, divine law, and the soul's ultimate destiny. Greek mythology also shaped art, literature, and philosophy in ways that extended far beyond religious observance. Epic poetry, from Homer to Hesiod, preserved mythic narratives in literary form, influencing subsequent generations of storytellers, dramatists, and historians. Tragedians such as Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides reinterpreted myths, exploring human emotion, ethical conflict, and divine intervention with psychological and moral depth. Myth became a medium through which the complexities of human existence could be explored, offering insight into ambition, pride, justice, and the interplay between fate and free will. Sculptures, pottery, and frescoes immortalized gods, heroes, and legendary events, embedding mythic memory within the aesthetic and cultural landscape of Greek civilization. The philosophical reflections of classical thinkers further reinforced the legacy of myth. While some philosophers sought to rationalize or allegorize mythic narratives, Others recognized the ethical and symbolic value of myth in understanding the human condition. Plato, for instance, employed myth as a vehicle for conveying metaphysical truths and moral principles, illustrating the continued relevance of narrative to philosophical inquiry. Even as myths were subjected to critical analysis, their capacity to shape ethical reasoning, social norms, and cultural identity remained undiminished, demonstrating their enduring role as frameworks for thought and moral reflection. Beyond Greece, the influence of Greek mythology extended across cultures and historical epochs. Roman adaptation, through the incorporation of deities such as Jupiter, Venus, and Mars, ensured that mythic narratives remained central to Mediterranean cultural consciousness. Renaissance scholars and artists revived classical myths, integrating their themes into literature, painting, and sculpture, while Enlightenment thinkers engaged with myth as a source of ethical and aesthetic insight. Myths inspired modern literature, drama, and film, providing archetypal characters, narrative structures, and symbolic motifs that continue to resonate. The enduring appeal of these stories lies in their exploration of universal themes: the struggle between order and chaos, the consequences of ambition and hubris, the pursuit of virtue, and the tension between fate and agency. Greek myths also influenced moral and ethical frameworks, offering paradigms of heroism, justice, and the relationship between humans and the divine. The tales of Prometheus's defiance, Heracles' labors, and Odysseus' journeys illustrated the virtues of courage, wisdom, endurance, and ethical discernment. Even stories of failure, such as Agamemnon's tragic return or the destruction of Troy, provided cautionary lessons, emphasizing responsibility, restraint, and awareness of consequences. Myth became a repository of collective wisdom, codifying human experience and ethical principles in narrative form, ensuring that the lessons embedded in the lives of gods, heroes, and mortals remained accessible to succeeding generations. The transmission of Greek mythology also reflected its adaptability and universality. Myths were retold in varying forms to suit regional, political, or philosophical contexts, allowing them to remain relevant across diverse communities. This fluidity reinforced the idea that myths were not static. They were living narratives capable of reflecting contemporary concerns, ethical questions, and cultural aspirations. As stories were adapted and interpreted, the core principles of heroism, morality, divine human interaction, and cosmic order persisted, demonstrating the resilience and depth of mythic tradition. Ultimately, the legacy of Greek mythology lies in its dual nature as both narrative and principle. Myths preserved a vision of the cosmos in which divine and mortal forces interacted, ethical responsibility was tested, and human endeavour was measured against both physical and moral standards. They provided frameworks for understanding the natural world, social order, and personal conduct, while inspiring aesthetic, philosophical, and literary achievement. Through the continuity of story, ritual, and interpretation, Greek myths transcended their original cultural and historical context, remaining accessible and meaningful across millennia. The enduring significance of Greek mythology is evident in its continued presence in modern culture. Myths remain a source of artistic inspiration, a foundation for literary and cinematic narratives, and a lens through which human experience and ethical reflection are explored. Heroes, gods, and legendary events continue to captivate imagination, illustrating universal truths about courage, ambition, justice, and the interplay between fate and free will. These stories, while ancient in origin, remain timeless, preserving a vision of human experience shaped by moral, ethical, and cosmic principles. In conclusion, the legacy of Greek mythology is defined by its transformation from oral narrative to religious practice, literary canon, and philosophical reflection. The integration of myth into Orphic and mystery traditions, its preservation in literature and art, and its influence on later cultures ensured that these stories endured far beyond their original context. Greek myths provided not only entertainment, but also moral guidance, ethical insight, and a framework for understanding the human condition. Through the continuing study, retelling, and reinterpretation of these narratives, the lessons of heroism, divine interaction, and cosmic order remain vital, ensuring that Greek mythology endures as a timeless repository of cultural, ethical, and philosophical wisdom.